I've been on a Pro system kick lately, and with the release of the 7800 Plus, I feel like maybe a lot of other people are too. One thing that I love about the 7800, and Atari in general, is how I'll simply play a game to get footage for a video, and then become addicted and start playing it for fun after the fact. And it's usually surprising to me which games become my newest obsessions. Armor Attack 2, a little-known homebrew for the 7800, became a game that I played a ton after my Ranking 78 Atari 7800 homebrew video. When I gathered video for Secret Quest, I ended up playing that game for hours after the fact, trying to complete the lengthy 2600 adventure. And I plunged a ton of time into many Jaguar games for the same reasons, like Power Drive Rally and Atari carts. My point is, some of these games have a way to suck you in and get you motivated to either finish them, or to become something of a pro, gamer. And my most recent obsession has become Choplifter for the 7800. Even though I've owned the game since I was growing up, I never thought much about it, honestly. It was difficult, bordering frustrating to me as a kid, and as an adult, I seem to have found a new appreciation for it. So let's see if Choplifter is a game that the wider community might enjoy, or if you can safely pass it over in favor of shining gems for the 7800 library. Choplifter was originally released by Broderbund in 1982 for the Apple computers and was later ported to the Atari 8-bits, Commodore 64, VIC-20, 5200, ColecoVision, and for countless other platforms over the years. In 1985, Sega would expand upon the game for an arcade and Master System release, really adding more depth and longevity to the base created years prior. And many people think of this version when they think about Choplifter. But the 7800 is not a port of this arcade version, but rather a port of the Apple II original. This will no doubt be disappointing for some, but remember, the original is not a bad game for its time. The biggest question is, as with most of these games in the modern era, did it age well, and is it worth sinking time into? Well, maybe. Let's start with the graphics and sound before we dig deep into the gameplay. You play as a sortie, a rescue helicopter with limited front-facing firepower, and some pretty zippy pick-up-and-go abilities. That is to say that the chopper can maneuver and fly pretty well, especially when compared to your enemies. The chopper sprite is nice, large, and well animated. Both the top blade and the back propeller blade spin convincingly, and they look pretty cool on the 7800. The white and red design of the helicopter is also nice, and overall I really like the quality of the design. It also animates pretty well. The nose even lifts and dips as you fly and gain speed, which is a nice, convincing touch for the time. You start at the U.S. Embassy building, and the building itself looks good. The American flag sways and blows in the wind, and you start on the iconic yellow H circle before you start your missions. As you lift and take off, you fly over what looks like a series of Fujis. But this is actually the barrier keeping the enemies off of American soil. This shows where safety begins and ends, for you and the people you're trying to save. And saving these tiny people is the whole point to the game. There are 4 buildings evenly spread out beyond the barrier, and as the buildings become hit with tank fire or even friendly fire, the little people will run out, attempting to wave you down for a rescue. You have 16 people per building for a total of 64, and your goal is to rescue all of them with minimal casualties. And you'll also need to do this before you lose all 3 of your sorties. The people, the buildings, the enemy tanks, bombers, and... What the heck is that thing? According to the manual, it's a drone air mine? Huh, interesting. Anyway, the people, the buildings, the enemy crafts, and backgrounds all look good in my opinion. Most of the aircrafts and vehicles are large and easy to see and identify, which I like. The background even moves as you pilot your chopper, and you'll see some background clouds moving faster than others. It all looks nice, but the sound, as often is the case with the 7800, well, it's not great. You have the sound of your propellers, and while necessary, it can just be bad. I don't like it. The short tunes that play are fine, but the explosions lack the punch that we all know Atari consoles can perform. Overall, I'd say the graphics are a highlight to the game, and the sound is a sore spot to the game. But with these old games, well, gameplay is king, and Choplifter has it where it counts. but there just isn't much of it, unfortunately. As I said before, flying your copter can cause the nose to aim downward. And while this is a nice effect and makes shooting ground enemies easier, it can also be a detriment. When you're flying fast and have the bombers and drones approaching you from the front, you'll find it near impossible to hit them. But to me, this adds a strategic element to the gameplay that I really enjoyed. But some will no doubt find it frustrating at first. Do you fly quickly to get to the people and save them, or do you slow down, take your time, and make sure you arrive safely, even if it's at the cost of a few civilian lives? The game demands that you slow down and take your time, at least a little bit, but flying fast is so much fun that some people will find it counterintuitive, no doubt. And again, it can be anger-inducing to be sitting and collecting a large number of passengers just to have a bomber come and blow you up. But it's all part of the game, and you need to be ready to move at a moment's notice. And on top of all this, you yourself can splat civilians if you're not careful. And I honestly feel, bad when this happens. You are the savior of these teeny hostages, and when you crush one, well, you feel like a real monster. It once again adds a layer and depth to the gameplay that you might not initially think is there. You can spin the helicopter in 3 directions by pressing the right button, and have it face either right, left, or dead center. And it can move in any direction regardless of where you're facing, but this affects your ability to fight an oncoming enemy. Facing right or left lets you shoot enemies in the respective direction, but facing center makes hitting ground tanks much, much easier, especially when sitting still. Facing center also makes you a smaller target, which again, is something to consider. The gameplay is solid, and I enjoy it, but the problem comes in longevity and replay value. I just feel that there isn't enough here, unfortunately. The Sega arcade version fixed this in 1985, but Atari could only get the rights from Broderbund for the original for obvious reasons, and it makes me sad that more wasn't done to add value to the game. You have the one level, 64 civilians to save, and that's it. Most people will either fail or accomplish this task in about 10 minutes. You will either lose all your sorties or save some number of people, and then you can go back and try to improve as many times as you'd like. But after about an hour or maybe 2 with the game, I think most people will feel that they've done good enough and just move on. Now you can get replay value if you want to work towards 0 casualties. Luckily, it appears to be one of the more common and abundant carts on eBay. So if you decide you want to try it out, you won't be out much money for the trouble. But the game is fun, and I think it's tailor-made for people who want short play sessions where they can work towards saving everybody with 0 casualties. So with all that out of the way, we need to fly over the barricade into the embassy known as the pros and cons section and see what Choplifter has earned. And as always, we start with the pros. Choplifter looks good, with nice scrolling backgrounds and cool details all around. Both the player's sortie and the enemies are large and easily identifiable. The game plays well, and there are little bits of strategy to be found in most aspects of the gameplay. And I feel like it's a decent and fair challenge for people willing to tackle it. It's also easily available on eBay for a decent price. But we are already to the cons. Let's start with the sound. It's bad. Well, more annoying than anything, I guess. But so is the fate of any car on the 7800, I suppose. There is also little longevity and replay value in the game. I unfortunately think that most people will get bored of it fast. It's just a shame that Atari couldn't get the rights to the arcade version or expand upon this version a little bit. The game can also be difficult and frustrating to new players, and for some, it won't be worth learning or playing beyond this point. And finally, there's only one level, 64 civilians, and nothing else. Feels a bit bare bones. So with all that out of the way, I'm going to score Choplifter for the Atari 7800 2 Pro-Line controllers out of 5. What's here isn't bad, but there just isn't enough of it. I have a feeling that most people will be done with this game within an hour or two and see little reason to return. And I can't call that a good value. But hear me out. If you're a completionist, a high score chaser, or just an all-around swell person, then this game might present more value for you, because it's not a bad game, and there is longevity for people who don't mind seeing the same scenery over and over again. It's just, I have a feeling most people won't fall into that category. I liked it, but that's just me, and I don't think everybody will agree with me. But you've heard my point of view, now I want to hear yours. Have you played Choplifter? Did you own it back in the day? If so, what do you think of it? Is my review something you agree with, or am I way off base? Let me know the answers to all this and more in the comments down below. And please, leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you haven't yet. We cover all things Atari here on the channel. Also, check out the Discord, my social media, and our Patreon. These following classy Atarians support us there and via YouTube memberships, where you get early access to content and videos. I couldn't do this without their support and all of their help, and I can't thank them enough. But with all that said, it's time to wrap up this review here on the channel. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a helicopter pilot who's crushed 6 people while trying to save them, in the foreign country known as the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. And please remember to stay classy, Atarians. Honestly, the video game industry hasn't changed much over the years, as it seems a few popular games and genres dominate the landscape. Today it's sandbox games, MOBAs, and crafting games, but back in the 1980s it was space games and maze games. And like today, you have innovators who made genres popular to begin with, and then you have the people hoping to capitalize on the genre's popularity. But every so often, a game comes along into an already popular genre, and is so innovative and fun that it stands out from the crowd. There is no shortage of maze games on the Atari 7800 Pro system. So is Dungeon Stalker just another Me Too game, meant to capitalize on the genre's popularity back in the day? Or was it an innovator and something that deserves recognition, even all these years later? Dungeon Stalker is a port of Night Stalker that was originally released for the Intellivision way back in 1982. This port was developed by Steve Englehart and Mike Sarna in 2015, which is already going on 8 years old. Wow, time flies. I never played the original on the Intellivision, but I don't have to in order to recognize that this version is very engaging and well done. Graphically, the maze never changes, although the colors of the walls and backgrounds do change colors, which helps with a feeling of progression. Tougher enemies are introduced the further you get, and every so often you'll have to engage in a battle with a dark wizard that warps all over the stage and attempts to blast you down. I do like the couple of frames of animations that your player, the spiders, snakes, bats, and all the other enemies have, as it helps to make things feel like they're moving rather than just floating in open space. A lot of 7800 developers fall into the pit of using clashing colors in what I assume is an attempt to stand out, but I really like the color choices here. There's nothing that really made my eyes hurt, which is always a plus as us Atarians get older. Unfortunately, I don't care for the sound anywhere near as much as I like the graphics. Something about the sound feels abrasive to my ears, and I didn't particularly enjoy any of it. The game lacks music altogether, but the constant droning sound that plays along with the loud explosions and item pickup sounds just annoyed me. The longer I played, the more I disliked these sounds. Some of them are entirely too loud, while others are overly subdued. But I do like how as you run out of arrows, that droning dum-dum-dum sound gets louder, essentially letting you know what your ammo situation is without having to watch the gauge. That's a nice effect, but it's a shame they didn't use better sounds overall. The gameplay, however, is very well done, and if it wasn't as good as it is, I probably wouldn't have endured the sound for as long as I did. You start in the center ladder-looking room thing, and while you're in there, you're invincible and safe from enemy fire. If you touch the bats or spiders, then you're simply shocked and stay in place for a few seconds, making you vulnerable to the truly deadly enemies. The snakes, tiger head-looking thing, and the skeleton all can shoot at you, and those are the ones that take your lives away. The deadly enemies start out being just as easy to deal with as the spiders and bats, but eventually they'll require multiple hits to deal with, and can even block your projectiles with their own. If you manage to score enough points, the wizard that I mentioned before will spawn, and you have to deal with him one-on-one to proceed. This all would be good enough and offers a solid challenge, but depending on which difficulty level you choose, you'll have to deal with even more threats. In Novice, you have unlimited ammo and 8 lives, effectively making you into a superhero against the fiends in the maze. In the Standard mode, the spiders will start dropping spider webs, and if you don't deal with the webs quickly, they'll start to slow you down. You also have limited ammunition, so you'll have to collect new quivers often. And if a quiver spawns behind a web, then you'll have to wait for the enemies to work themselves far away before trying to grab it, as the web slows you down. You can also obtain a chalice for points, and a sword for a limited invulnerability, and that is a must for clearing later levels. These items are available in all difficulties, but if you're crazy enough to try Expert Mode, you'll be glad to have them. In Expert Mode, you deal with extremely tough enemies right off the bat, and your safety ladder is destroyed, making it no longer a safe zone. This can also happen in Standard Mode too, but only in the later levels. Overall, Dungeon Stalker offers a substantial challenge for players looking for a maze game that feels different from the Pac-Mans, KC Munchkins, and Go Subs of the world, or of the 7800 video game world at least. I like the variety of difficulties, as they actually feel very different from one another, and you should be able to find a setting for your skill level. The graphics and animations are pretty good, and the color choices are excellent in my eyes. It's nice having an audio cue for ammo, and it's honestly the only reason to keep the volume on. And the gameplay is fantastic. Unfortunately, this game is bogged down by a lack of background music, and the sound effects are just annoying altogether. The maze never truly changes, and the whole thing gets stale after a while. Also, I think this game is going to be a bit too hard for some, so if you're not looking for a real challenge, then you might want to stick with the maze games you're familiar with. Because of everything I just said, I feel that Dungeon Stalker deserves a score of 3 Pro-Line controllers out of 5. It's recommended for people that want to tackle the challenge, but I don't think it's going to be for everybody if I'm being honest. With all that said, I'm curious to hear if anybody has played the original on the Intellivision. Does Dungeon Stalker play better than that one? And do you agree with the score that I gave Dungeon Stalker? Give me your input in the comments section down below. I'm the 7800 Pro System Gamer on behalf of the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for checking out my review of Dungeon Stalker. Until next time, stay classy, Atarians. If there was one genre that was sorely missed on the Atari 7800 back in the day, it was platformers. There was countless platformers released on the NES back in the day, and they ranged from brilliant and fun to bland and repetitive. But there was no lack of them on Nintendo's freshman console. The 7800, on the other hand, had one, the middling Scrapyard Dog. Even if it had 2 or 3 others, I think it would have gone a long way in legitimizing the console to the gaming media of the time and consumers. And even in this homebrew renaissance that we are currently living in for the Atari 7800, platformers are still somewhat hard to find. So I think we all had high expectations for Bentley Bear's Crystal Quest on the 7800. Even if it was 30 years too late, there was hope that this would finally be the Atari Super Mario Bros. So did we finally get vindicated after all this time? Or is Bentley Bear's Crystal Quest proof that the 7800 didn't have what it takes to succeed? Let's find out. Bentley Bear's Crystal Quest was released in 2014 by Atari Age, and was developed by the great and powerful Robert DeCrescenzo. It seems to use several NES-style platformers as inspiration, but the biggest appears to be Adventure Island and the early Wonder Boy games on the Sega Master System. But there are secrets and exploration elements from games like Super Mario Bros., which is nice for adding longevity to Crystal Quest. You also have the constantly draining life of the previously mentioned Adventure Island and Wonder Boy, but it's not as fast as in those games. And instead of various fruits, you have to collect honey pots to keep your health up. Or you can try to fly through the levels fast enough to keep it from being an issue. While you can fly through the levels fairly quickly, at least in 2-button mode, and more on that in a minute, the enemies are enough of a challenge that I couldn't really do it consistently. The early enemies, like the nasty trees and skeletons, don't present much of a challenge, and can be leapt over easily. But it's not long before you encounter gem eaters, who jump at you, bee swarms who approach you from the right and eventually chase you to the left, and coyotes, who react to your movements and button presses in smart ways. Even the zombies can be difficult to dispatch, unless you're good at headshots. Overall, I really like the enemy designs and graphics, and they present a fun, but fair challenge that increases gradually. Good stuff. As I said, I like the enemy sprites. They look good. And Bentley himself is a little rotund, but cute. The backgrounds start out a little plain for my taste, but it wasn't long before more and more details crept into the scenery.
making it more of a pleasure to look at. Well, for a while anyway. You start out by leaving Bentley's cave in the forest, and travel deep within it before venturing into the ocean and some very small islands. Then you travel to a mountain range complete with caves, and all of these locales look great, but once you get to the last two worlds, things get decidedly more ugly. The castle levels are harsh on the eyes, and while the final cave levels are better, they are still a step down from the start of the game, at least in my opinion. But overall, the backgrounds and locations are all different and fun, with a few really good-looking secret worlds that I wish weren't so well hidden. And I think now is a good time to bring up the number of rounds in each world. There are roughly 8 rounds for each of the 5 worlds, or levels as this game calls them. And I feel that the number is just too high. The game isn't overly long, and there are warps aplenty, but I couldn't help but to feel that the first world was never going to end during my first time playing. Round 5, Round 6, Round 7, when the heck am I leaving this forest? I don't know, but I think how this is presented could have been done better. And yeah, this is probably a nitpick and nothing that seriously detracts from the game, but I think it's worth bringing up. The audio is a clear step up from what we've come to expect on the 7800. And that's because early versions of this game uses the legendary Pokey audio chip from earlier games like Ball Blazer and Commando. In fact, in the beginning, Ball Blazer carts were harvested for this precious chip. Luckily, we have things like the Hokey today, which allows Ball Blazer carts to reach fans and collectors, rather than sitting in some programmer's home waiting to be harvested. But back to the audio itself, the game uses the classical music that Bentley Bear is known for, and it sounds great. Truly, the music is a high point for the game, and it was wise to include the enhanced sound. The sound effects themselves sound pretty good too, and overall, Bentley Bear's Crystal Quest is an audio treat for the 7800, something that every classic platforming game needs. The wise and powerful Robert DeCrescenzo wanted this game to be accessible to as many people as possible, including those who prefer or only have one-button joysticks. To switch between one-button mode and two-button mode, you need to flip the Player 1 difficulty switch and reset the game for the change to take effect. I highly recommend two-button mode, and you'll know you're in it if up doesn't make your little bear jump. The right button should throw gems when you've collected them, and the left button should make him jump. But the added benefit of the two-button mode is being able to hold down the throw button in order to make him run very fast. And this is a must for the more difficult platforming sections and dealing with the harder enemies. Speaking of platforming, it's done top-notch in Crystal Quest. Our hero is easy to control and everything is as responsive as one would want. Occasionally, when trying to move fast, I would forget to release the throw button in time to use my weapon, but that might be more of a me issue than anything else. Throwing gems is satisfying, and something you'll want to get good at, because outside of the magical hat that you'll find infrequently, it's your only method of defense. At the beginning of the game, and after a game over, you'll need to find the white gem before you can throw any, which seems unnecessary as it's always right in front of you, but it does teach you that you need to find these things. And you'll want to keep an eye out for the blue and especially red gems, because they increase your power substantially. And you'll want to increase in power to retain your lives and get the good ending. You'll also need them in dealing with the end-level boss, Berthilda. She is the boss in every single world, with some difficulty increases in each. Initially, she'll charge at you from the right-hand side of the screen, but eventually you'll also have to deal with huge holes in the ground while battling her, and you'll have to deal with the floating heads too. These floating heads can make battling her very frustrating, not to mention the devastating surprise she has during your very last battle. With just the white gem, it takes forever to take out Berthilda, but with a few blue and red gems, it's much more bearable. Honestly, I find these boss battles to be frustrating and repetitive, and I really end up disliking them by the end of the game. I'm all for challenge, but the only way I could find to beat her is to slowly scroll the screen until she appears, and then staying as far left as I can. This way she couldn't reach me, but I could hit her as she lunged towards me. It would have been nice to have some more variety in who the end bosses were, but we are stuck with just Berthilda, and well, I wish she was just more fun to dispatch. And I think that's most of what I wanted to say about Bentley Bear's Crystal Quest on the Atari 7800. All that's left to do is to take our lovable bear and his adventure into the Atari Network Pros and Cons section to see if the game is worth experiencing. And as always, let's start with the pros. I really like the enemy and player sprites. I feel that they are all clearly familiar from Crystal Castles, but upgraded and improved nicely. The backgrounds can be hit or miss in their details, but when they're good, I have to say, they're really good. The sound is top-notch thanks to the enhanced audio chip, and including it was a smart choice, even if it made the cartridge more expensive. The controls also work well, and there are a ton of secrets to find each time you play. For the cons, let's start with the level numbering system. While the game and levels aren't too long, the high number of rounds makes you wonder if you'll ever see anything different during your first playthrough, and that's just not good for the feeling of progression. While one-button control mode is a nice inclusion, it's nowhere near as good as two-button mode, and dealing with Perthilda can be a pain. It's especially punishing if you died and are stuck with the basic gem. Oh, and some of the levels, like the castle world, don't look as nice as the others. Okay, after making it out the other side of the pros and cons section, I think we know what we need to score Bentley Bear's Crystal Quest. So after all that, I'm going to give it 4 Pro-Line controllers out of 5. It's really good and a solid platformer for the 7800. We would have went nuts for this game back in the 80s and very early 90s. You can still get it from Atari Age for about $60 with the box and manual. Or, if you have the VCS, you can get it there for a fraction of the price. It's worth picking up either way, as it's the best platformer on the 7800 and a good one in general. And it's completely compatible with the 2600 Plus. I collected all my footage for this video on the 2600 Plus and was able to play it from start to finish. If you love Atari, and especially the 7800, then Bentley Bear's Crystal Quest needs to be in your library. But now I want to hear from all of you. Have you played Bentley Bear's Crystal Quest? And if so, do you agree with my thoughts and score? Is this a great platformer, or should our friendly little bear have stayed in the castles? Let me know the answers to all this and more in the comments down below. And please, leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the review. I do a video just like this one every Sunday. And I also do a featured video on the channel every Thursday. So subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified when a new video goes up. Also, I'd like to thank the following classy Atarians for supporting me on Patreon. They donate just $5 a month to keep the channel going by allowing me to pick up new equipment, get new things to cover, and much more. In return, a few times a month I put out some special features just for Patreons. So thank you to Jeremiah Thomas, Mr. Shua TV, Fens the Spook, Socrates63, Ball Gobbler, Jolt 7800, Head Trauma Bob, OG Hugo, and my own Celestial. I couldn't do this without all of your support, so thank you. And with all that said, I think it's time we wrap things up. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a gem-obsessed bear here at the Crystal Castle, known as the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. And remember to stay classy, Atarians.
Paddle games were a mainstay on Atari's original VCS or 2600 console. They originate from the Pong games that preceded the 2600's interchangeable cartridges and ability to bring the arcade home. But paddle games were a genre all their own, and eventually grew from the basic Pong and Breakout style games into attempts at long-form adventures like Jinx and especially Arkanoid. And knowing all this, it might be surprising for some to realize that the 7800, a console built upon the successful 2600 base, actually had no paddle games developed for the platform during its retail life. Homebrew developers have since decided to rectify this overlooked aspect of Atari's NES competitor by releasing a few paddle games for the Pro system. So in this video, I thought it would be fun to look at 3 paddle-compatible games for the 7800 and see which of them are worth playing and which of them you should pass up. And there's no better place to start than with Robert DeCrescenzo's breakout homage, Crazy Bricks. Crazy Bricks was published to the Atari Age store back in 2011, and it's the most traditional paddle-style game on the list. The idea is as basic as it comes, but with some nods and flares that are sure to invoke some nostalgia for Atari fans. Each level presents its own patterns and challenges, And you'll need to bring your A game to see the later levels for sure. To use the paddle controller, you'll need to insert it into the second controller port, and make sure that the left difficulty switch is flipped to the left. This is outlined in the manual, but I'm sure some people missed this little detail. Please note though, that I had to capture all these games from the original 7800 hardware, which is why the video isn't in HD quality. I couldn't get a single one of these games to work with the 7800 or 2600 Plus. Hopefully this can be fixed with an update, but for now, I can't recommend these games for those consoles, if you want true paddle controls. Anyway, Crazy Bricks plays as you would expect, and the ball moves and reacts to hitting the bricks, walls, and especially your paddle in ways that make sense. It's all really solid in the gameplay department, and even though the game is basic, it hooked me in with the addition of nostalgic sound effects and designs. You will recognize early patterns as the simple ones from Breakout and even Super Breakout, but it won't be long before you encounter Space Invaders and the key from Adventure. This is a really smart way to pay respects to the early Atari games that we all grew up with and loved, while keeping the patterns themselves unique. However, this also means that not every level is built the same. Some are lengthy and challenging, while others are, well, gimmicky and short, but not a single one of them I would call bad. It plays well, and does what it should, all while hitting you in the nostalgia. The graphics aren't much more than what you would expect. As I said, the patterns are fun, but it's still just bricks, a paddle, and a ball. There really isn't much different visually that I could think about him trying, at least not on the 7800. But the sounds are where Robert DeCrescenzo really went above and beyond. Again, in an attempt to keep things familiar and to pay homage to Atari's history, the sound effects are all pulled from earlier games from the 2600. This is just a simple but brilliant aspect that goes a long way in adding a lot of charm to the package. I've been complaining a lot about the audio in 7800 games lately, but this gem of a title really reminded me of why I loved Atari growing up and why I decided to cover them today. In a sense, this game was my Ratatouille, if anybody is familiar with that reference. And really, there isn't much more to say about Crazy Bricks, even if I wasn't trying to keep these reviews short and concise. It's a fun, brick-breaking game that works very well, and is sure to bring up some nostalgic feelings for fans of Atari. The sound is A+, and some of the best I've experienced on the 7800 in a good while. It's a simple game, but it works, and it brings a smile to my face. As do the patterns, even if not all levels are equal in challenge, especially the later ones. So with all that said, I'm going to give Crazy Bricks for the Atari 7800 4 Pro-Line controllers out of 5. It's good, but the only real flaw is maybe the difficulty. Sometimes the game is easy, but it can get crazy hard too. But with that, let's move on to the next 7800 paddle game I want to look at, and it's an update to a classic that I personally love. Super Circus Atari Age, much like Crazy Bricks, was released to the Atari Age store back in 2011 and was programmed by the wise and powerful Robert DeCrescenzo. And it takes the classic Atari Circus idea and expands on it graphically, along with adding a few unique ideas and options to the set formula. I loved Circus Atari as a kid, but I found it extraordinarily frustrating to play. It was one of those games that I loved the premise of, but I just couldn't play it well in practice. But playing this version as a grown man, well, I have to say that it's still frickin' hard. It made it all the more rewarding when I started to get the hang of it. Similar to the 2600 Classic, you take control of a clown on a teeter-totter, and you must move them both in order to catch a second clown who is jumping onto it from the side of the screen. Once you do catch him on the open side, it'll send your stationary clown upwards in an effort to pop balloons, and then you must catch him to repeat the process as many times as possible. Your goal is to pop as many balloons as possible before killing off all your clowns with horrible neck injuries. It's a brutal game, trust me. But this version, unlike the 2600 version stick figures, has some awesome, inviting graphics that really are kid-friendly and cute. Not to mention that the music that plays all the while feels appropriate and is well done. Overall, the presentation is just top tier. as one would expect from Bob DeCrescenzo. He is the GOAT for a reason. The options allow you to tailor the experience to your liking, letting you do things like change the graphics to the original 2600 mode, decide if the rows regenerate once you clear all the balloons, or if you wait until the whole playfield is cleared in order to replace them all. And of course, you have the option to use either a paddle or a joystick. Now you must follow the Crazy Bricks rules of using the paddle, so plug it into the second player port, and, well, unfortunately the Plus consoles still don't work. But the difficulty switches. Again, much like the 2600 version, adds more obstacles to the clown's act. And this comes in the form of blocks that prevent you from reaching the balloons. I personally find the game hard enough without these blocks, but they're there if you should want them. I love Super Circus Atari Age, and I really enjoy the aspects that they added. If you play the mode where you must clear the entire playfield, you'll be rewarded with the Atari Age logo coming out from the side of the screen once you clear all the balloons. And once in a while, you'll even encounter some familiar characters from Adventure for more points. The power-ups work well too, and are a welcome addition to the gameplay, allowing you to clear certain rows, giving you a net to save one of your clowns from the floor, and so forth. Overall, the game is excellent in every category that I can think of. But man, it's just so hard. A lot of people find the game hard to get into because of the difficulty. I think they're probably using the gamepad, and this game works incredibly well with the paddles. But if you have the Plus consoles, well, you'll be stuck with that gamepad. So with all that said, and with considering the extreme difficulty, and the lack of variety once you get the hang of the game, I think I'm going to rate it 3 Pro Lines out of 5. It's good, but it's not going to be for everybody, especially if you don't have the option to use the paddles. But I personally really enjoyed the game, and I play it a couple times every year. But with that, it's time to move on to the most recent paddle game released as of this recording. And this one is from the minds over at Video 61 Atari Sales. Let me introduce you all to my most anticipated game from Video 61, Tile Smashers. Tile Smashers was released to the Atari 7800 in January of 2025. It was created by Peter Meyer, Lance Ringquest, and the rest of the team over at Video 61. Side note, but I personally love these 3D printed cartridges with the raised end labels. It's a nice touch for collectors. The game itself is dubbed a combination of Breakout, Pong, and even Pinball, and I can see where they were going with this. Each level is multi-tiered, with at least 2 screens, meaning that the screen will flip at certain times, usually when you've either opened a door or cleared the last screen. This allows you to bounce the ball to the next screen, which had me excited. The pinball elements come in the form of various obstacles, spinners, and bumpers you'll encounter around the levels, and the Pong aspect is in the form of computer-controlled paddles around the levels as well. Overall, the game doesn't look or sound bad, and I found it sort of charming for the console. Much like Crazy Bricks, it's hard to think of anything too different that they could have done with the standard Breakout formula. And this game has that Video 61 signature style that people usually either love or hate. Me personally, I enjoy it, but that's just me. There are power-ups as well, much like in Super Circus Atari Age. But I find that these power-ups vary wildly in their usefulness. I do understand that 3 of these so-called power-ups are actually power-downs, but it's hard to decipher one from another while playing. These power-ups allow you to grow your paddle to a huge size, give your ball the ability to either power through every brick or sort of bounce through them, and you even gain the ability to guide the ball around a little bit. But you can also electrocute your paddles, taking away control for a little while, shrink your paddle down to a smaller size, and acquire something called Crazy Ball. And this is where my first complaint comes in. Crazy Ball makes the ball veer either to the left or right at random times. And it just feels, well, wrong. Again, I know this is the point of the power down, but it doesn't feel unique and fun. You see, in these kind of games, proper ball physics is key to making the game feel fair and challenging. But when the ball refuses to act the way that it should, well, that's where you start to feel cheated. And unfortunately, the ball physics were already a little wonky. Now, they aren't awful, but they don't feel as good as in the original Breakout or even in Crazy Bricks. But it's forgivable, and the ball does follow a consistent set of rules that you'll learn quickly. So the game's not bad, just not great either. especially in the physics department. My biggest complaint, unfortunately, is the game's biggest selling point, the tiered game fields. I loved the idea of this before playing Tile Smashers, but the execution leaves a lot to be desired. The ball tends to travel from one screen to another, causing the screens to transition quite a bit without you really being able to control it. This is because the obstacles are close to the top of the screen usually, and the door is a large portion at the top of the screen as well. This results in large sections of the game where you just want to get down a tier to finish the level, but the ball continues to bounce itself up to the next tier as you attempt to keep it down in an act of futility. I feel that if the screen scrolled, this wouldn't be an issue. And it all feels very Alien Crush, if you're familiar with that TurboGrafx-16 game. That's to say that much like the original Alien Crush pinball game, the screen should have scrolled. Flipping it leaves a lot to be desired, and it's just jarring. I don't think it works the way Video 61 intended. Still, this game isn't bad. It's just a letdown compared to the last two in this video. Tile Smashers is solid and leans a bit to the easy side, so if you're a breakout novice, then you might do well to start here. And again, the paddles work great on original hardware, no complaints there. But if you own the Plus consoles, well, again, you're SOL. But when comparing Tile Smashers to the other two paddle games, and after weighing the pros and cons of it, I feel that it's my duty to give it 2 Proline controllers out of 5. Paddle game fans and breakout fans will be happy enough to have it and play it, but most other people probably won't be able to forgive the numerous flaws. I love Video 61, and it pains me to say all that, but I need to keep my integrity, and unfortunately that's just how this game is. But you've listened to me ramble about 3 unique paddle games now, so let me start to hear what you all think. Do you enjoy paddle games like I do? Do you own any of these featured in this video? If so, do you agree with my scores? And which was your favorite that we covered here? Let me know about all this and more in the comments down below. And please consider following me on social media by searching for the Atari Network or the 7800 Pro Gamer. You can also join our Discord for access to high score challenges and just to chat with us. And consider leaving a like before you go. You can also subscribe and hit the bell icon, it helps a ton. We have a Patreon and offer YouTube memberships if you want to support us further. These classy Atarians have done just that, and I couldn't possibly thank them enough. Thanks to them, I can cover more things on the channel, replace and upgrade equipment, and do awesome giveaways, like our 5200 subscriber giveaway. Links to that and everything else is in the description below. And again, thanks for all the support, guys. You all rock. And with that, it's time to wrap up this video on 3 Atari 7800 paddle games. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a man who enjoys hitting my balls against the wall for a few hours. Wait, balls again? Never mind. Yeah, anyway, I'm at the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. And remember to stay classy, Atarians. Reviewing Bounty Bob Strikes Back is really the tale of 2 periods with the game. That is to say, the experience can be very different depending on the amount of time you're willing to spend with it, and your ability to decipher and alter the options to your liking. Programmed by Robert DeCrescenzo for Atari in late 2024, Bounty Bob Strikes Back is a port of a sequel to Miner 2049er that was released very early into the history of video games. And it's kind of a head-scratcher why this sequel was released on the 7800 rather than the arguably more approachable original. But regardless of head-scratches, programming, and release dates, I'm here to review this version of a cult classic for the Atari 7800 and the new Atari 7800 Plus console. So let's see if it's worth picking up for your 7800 Plus, and I'll even be generous and give a few tips and tricks to get the most out of the game. But enough intro stuff, let's dive right into the review. Bounty Bob Strikes Back is the main game I was looking forward to with the announcement of the 7800 Plus,
and its original complement of games. It was the only game in the lineup that wasn't previously available either on Atari Age or via Atari themselves back in the day. And it was programmed by the Atari 7800 homebrew GOAT, Pac-Man Plus, aka Robert DeCrescenzo. Seriously, this guy has made a ton of excellent 7800 games, including the pack-in for the 7800 Plus, Bentley Bear's Crystal Quest. The guy kept interest alive in the console when nobody else seemed to care, and I personally love him for that. And I get excited for his games when they're announced, but Bounty Bob Strikes Back feels like an odd game to choose to port to the console. But regardless, I received the cartridge and plopped it into my brand spanking new 7800 Plus, even before the pack-in game, and it's pretty evident right from the start that Bob stayed true to the original game. That is to say, I don't think he took many opportunities to improve things, at least graphically, and the 7800 could definitely do more in my opinion. But Bob is always about authenticity, and the game isn't really ugly per se, just kinda blocky. It's pretty evident what things are, or at least what should be done with them. When you start the game, you're the hat-wearing fellow in the lower middle of the screen, and the little Goomba-style guys are the enemies. You collect objects, and similar to Pac-Man, the enemies will change color and design, showing that they are vulnerable to being destroyed after you pick things up. As you move, you will also notice that the platforms will start to fill in with color, and this is ultimately your goal. Fill in all the platforms with color before the time ticks down to 0, or before losing all your lives via fall damage in the enemies. And yes, there is fall damage. And that's something I absolutely despise in video games. I hated that about so many early platforming games. But back to the graphics, everything looks passable, if not just a little disappointing in my opinion. It all screams 5200 to me, and I just wish more had been done to take advantage of the 7800, and to get me excited in picking up the 7800 Plus. But purists will be pleased that things stayed true to the originals, and I don't find the game offensive graphically. And the audio isn't bad either if I'm honest, but it's sparse. The 7800 isn't known for robust sound, which is obviously one of the reasons the NES trounced it back in the late 80s. But there are nice, adventurous tunes that play and some decent sound effects. One in particular is a bit grating to me, and it seems to be used more often than I would have liked, but overall it's nothing to really complain about. Like I said, the sound is sparse overall, and what's here is more often good than bad. The gameplay, however, is going to be decisive for most people. If you're used to modern games and gaming sensibility, then controlling Bounty Bob is going to feel just wrong. Without toying or turning on any options, he feels stiff and jumps at specific arcs that doesn't feel satisfying. Quite the opposite. It can be frustrating to platform with Bob. And that's not good for a single-screen platforming game. I have to say that my initial hour with Bounty Bob Strikes Back was soundly negative. I hate the way the gameplay felt, and I only made it past the first level maybe 2 times, and then I was just quickly killed in the next lift stage. I shut the game off in disgust and moved on to something else. But I knew I wanted to review this game, and I have to find some way to persevere. And as silly as it is, my savior was in the options menu that I had ignored up to this point. There are some nice options here outside of the basic, expected ones. Of course, you can choose players, difficulty, and the number of lives, but Pac-Man Plus wisely added in things like, well, how many points it takes to get your bonus guy, and best of all, steerable, which allows you to steer your jumps. If I was you, and I'm not, but if I was, I would enable this steerable option from the start and never look back. This will allow you to progress much further in the game and make things much more fun overall. If you've been playing with steerable disabled, then it might be difficult to get accustomed to the new jumping, but it's much better regardless. With this steerable option toggled on, I was able to make it to the 5th or 6th level routinely. And the challenge was still there, mind you. The game is very old school in that aspect, and you're going to get a little further every time you play. And it's rewarding in that aspect. It's cool getting to a new level that you've never seen before after persevering through the game. But I doubt this is going to be for everybody, even with the steerable option toggled on. And again, there is fall damage, and it's going to frustrate some people regardless. And the controls can be a bit finicky at times, especially with the 7800 Plus pack-in controller. Now maybe it was just me, but sometimes I would go through doors when I didn't intend to. I'm not going to hold it against the game, but I wanted to mention it. And I didn't have this problem with the superior OG Hugo 2-button 7800/2600 gamepad from its eBay store. Link in the description, great low price. Oh man, sorry about that. But anyway, I think some people are going to quit this game early on, regardless of the options, and that's because it's very much a game steeped in the old school style of platformers. And it won't be for everybody. But I encourage you to stick with it, because the game is actually quite rewarding to learn and progress through. Making it to a new screen feels well earned, and it's an experience I really started to look forward to. And there is a lot of game here for the money. Of all the 7800 games released alongside the 7800 Plus, I think this one has the longest potential longevity. But there's no accounting for taste, and it's a game that I learned to love, much like Scrapyard Dog. Bounty Bob Strikes Back initially frustrated me, and made me want to quit. But it grew on me like many old school games do. And when I learned to play by its rules, slow down just a tiny bit, and take on the game the way the developer intended me to, I found a great experience to be had. Like I said, if you want to get the most out of it, but you're not enjoying the experience, then turn Steerable on, and lower the extra life score so you get it sooner. Then take your time, think before navigating the obstacles, and just push through. And you will encounter new obstacles like the tubes that suck you in the second you touch them. So you may want to make sure that the enemies are vulnerable before you commit to sucking into these tubes. And the slides will send you down whether you want them to or not. So make sure you're careful where you land when jumping. You want to do that anyway to avoid the horrible fall damage. But with those small tips, I think that's all I have to say about Bounty Bob Strikes Back by Atari and Robert DeCrescenzo. So let's take the game into the patented Atari Network Pros and Cons section to see if it earns a favorable score or not. For the pros, I like how the game cycles through colors each time you start a stage. It adds a little charm to everything. And I appreciate the options menu and its many, many choices. Mess around with some of these and see what happens, but I recommend turning Steerable on no matter what else you do. The game does grow on you, and once you get used to it, you'll find a lot to enjoy and play for the money. And the sound is mostly good too, and the short tunes are nice sounding. But with that, we're on to the cons, and I want to start by saying that this game is difficult. It's tough to get anywhere at first, and it's very much an old school platformer. The fall damage is frustrating and you won't make it far at all, at least your first few tries. There is one sound that I found grating, and the graphics are a tad bit archaic looking, even for the 7800. I wish some improvements had been done. But with all that said, I have to give Bounty Bob Strikes Back for the Atari 7800 2 Proline controllers out of 5. Now you might see that score and think that there's something wrong with the game, but really there isn't. It's solid, but it's difficult and frustrating. I think the majority of people aren't going to want to go back to this one after 1 or 2 tries, and I would usher them to buy something different. Bentley Bear's Crystal Quest, Frenzy, Berserk, and Space Duel will probably be better suited for these people. But if you like tough as nails old school platformers, then this one is available for the first time on the Atari 7800. So pick it up if that's what you want, but don't say I didn't warn you. And with that, well, now I want to hear from all of you. Do you agree with my score, or am I way off base? Should the game have gotten a 3 out of 5? Or is this a good argument to start doing 0.5 scores like 2.5, 3.5, etc.? Did you own this game back in the day for any other platforms? And if so, is this version true to those? And will you be picking this one up if you haven't yet? Let me know about all this and more in the comments down below. And please consider becoming a Patreon or YouTube member. Thanks to them, this channel is able to continue to go and grow strong. We just did a high score competition where I was able to commission some custom Atari 7800 trophy cartridges that work in actual 7800 consoles. Thank you to everybody that participated, and congratulations to the winners: Crypto Coffee, HugeAss79, and Red Dog Games. Thank you to everybody who participated, and thank you to the Patreons and members for making this happen. Join the Atari Network Discord server so you can be a part of the next competition or giveaway, or just chat with fellow Atarians. And with that, it's time to wrap up this review on the channel. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a grizzly miner working in the crypto mines here at the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. And please remember,
to stay classy, Atarians. Franco Dragon is probably one of the most prolific and crazy developers of Atari 7800 homebrew that I've ever purchased from. Looking through his library of software can be surreal, as you find games like Asteroids, that has a label with William Shatner pooping on a toilet, front and center. Roof Pooper, a game that's about pooping on people from a roof. Hardy Manslapper, a game about escaping a man's internal organs. And Big Burrito, a game where you feed your overweight boss burritos until he's satisfied. And that's just the start of the list. You never know what to expect when you buy one of Franco Dragon's games, and Lava Lamps and 8 Tracks Theater is no exception. Apparently it's based on a pirate radio station and features DJ Nurse, somebody who actually commented in one of my videos where I looked at 78 Atari 7800 homebrews. She told me that her game isn't a homebrew because Nolan Bushnell endorsed it apparently, even though he had nothing to do with Atari Corp or the Atari 7800 that it was released on. And it also came out many, many years after the console's lifespan. But who am I to argue with her? I mean, if she says it's a legitimate release, it's a legitimate release, I guess. You can find the game available on her eBay store from time to time, and she even autographs them before mailing them out. But is it worth picking up this Bushnell-endorsed official release? No, it's not. I'm not sure how much time or effort that Franco Dragon really put into this game, but it's extremely difficult to play. Initially, you only fight an enemy or two per screen. A pig and a wolf, I believe, and they continually spawn from the sides of the screen. You can punch with the left button and kick with the right button, but no matter what you do, you're going to take damage. There's a few other enemies you'll encounter, skeletons, robots, and a big cowboy robot that seems to be the boss character of most levels. But there's nothing you can really do from having your health drained by nearly every enemy you encounter, especially the robots and skeletons. And tons of them will start to bombard you from the sides of the screen, and there's nothing you can do to escape them. They'll follow you from the top to the bottom of the level. Your only hope is to have enough health to kill and outlast them, and get lucky with screen transitions as they stay where they were on the previous screen to the next. You can find a tuft of grass, or maybe it's a sort of fern. Either way, it refills your health, but there's usually only one per level. Once in a while, you'll have a level that's a single screen, instead of multiple screens long, and that's really it for variety. You can beat the game in about 10 to 20 minutes if you really try, but I don't recommend it. The nurse sprite looks okay and the enemy sprites are good enough, but the background and color choices are hard on the eyes and make the game difficult to keep playing. The audio is just bad, honestly. I don't like to be overly negative about homebrew games because somebody put their heart and soul into creating this one, but I'm sorry, I have to protect my viewers too, and this isn't worth spending money on. Collectors will want it because, well, let's face it, we want everything, but everybody else can safely pass on this one. You're not missing anything, really. If I had to go through the pros and cons, I would say that the pros are the nice nurse sprite and the fact that you can tell what most of the enemies are supposed to be. And that's about it, honestly. The cons are the poor gameplay, the non-stop spawning enemies, the weak combat system, the levels and colors being hard on the eyes, and the audio just being plain bad. With all that said, I'm going to give Lava Lamps and 8 Tracks Theater 1 Pro-Line controller out of 5. Again, I'm not trying to be overly mean, but it's a game you're not going to want to play, and even if you force yourself to see it through to the end, you'll get maybe 20 minutes out of it. Franco Dragon has some great stuff for sale, but this ain't it. If I had to recommend a game, I'd say get Roof Pooper or maybe Hardy Manslapper. I guess that's it for this one, guys. Let me know in the comments down below if you've ever played this game before. Do you own it? Am I being too harsh on it? If you don't own it, will you pick it up when you can, despite my warnings? And is anybody familiar with the pirate radio show that this is based on? Again, let me know in the comments down below. This is the 7800 Pro System Gamer for the Atari Network, and I wanted to thank you all for checking out another review. Keep it classy, Atarians. Frenzy/Berserk for the Atari 7800 is one of those homebrews that surprised me in more than one way. I was surprised at how affordable it can be, at just $35 for a loose cartridge. I was surprised at how well regarded it is by the community. After all, Berserk is a game that you can play easily on the 2600,
and I didn't know if Frenzy was well known among the community or not. I've never really heard it talked about. But I was also surprised that it wasn't removed from the Atari Age store during its mass exodus of games in the summer of 2023. But let's see if Frenzy has one more pleasant surprise for me and how well it was executed on the console. Seeing as how it was done by the wise and powerful Robert De Crescenzo, I have high expectations for this game. But without further ado, let's take a look at Frenzy on the Atari 7800. Frenzy was originally released in 1982 for the arcades, and was the sequel to the 1980s arcade hit, Berserk. Lucky for us, both versions are available on this single cartridge for the Atari 7800. This port was done by Robert De Crescenzo, as I said before, and was released back in 2013. Not only does this port have both Frenzy and Berserk, but it also has 3 different multiplayer options for each game. You can play 2-player alternating, where you take turns venturing into the labyrinths and surviving against your robot assailants. You can also play 2-player competitive and 2-player cooperative, where you play at the same time. The only difference here is whether or not you can damage one another with friendly fire. I'm sure these 2-player modes are a blast, but I wasn't able to test them for this review. It's an incredible inclusion to have all these multiplayer options, to say the least. At the main menu, you get a short tune that plays while you select your options. Let's take a look at Berserk first, and I have to say, this is a pretty good looking version of the game. Now, don't get me wrong, Berserk was never a beautiful or complicated game, but as far as I can tell, this is pretty accurate to the arcade. And what's this? The voices are included? Music to my ears, and it sounds pretty good. If you've never played Berserk before, then welcome to the outside world. What was it like living under a rock? But I'll explain it quickly. You take control of a human and must shoot and avoid not only the enemy robots who shoot and chase you, but the walls as well. The walls are electrified, and even the slightest touch ends with you losing a life. You also must work quickly, as Evil Auto will spawn after some time, and chase you relentlessly until you move on to another screen. There is no killing this evil, bouncing smiley face. The gameplay is excellent, I would say almost perfect. I can't think of a single scenario where I died and it wasn't my fault. And the same can be said for Frenzy as well, which mostly plays exactly the same. The only difference is the inclusion of some equipment in some of the rooms that can immobilize the robots, or confuse them, etc. You also have some walls that you can shoot through in order to create shortcuts, or to kill enemies who are otherwise unreachable. And finally, you can bank your bullets around corners and bounce them off solid walls. Overall, these improvements make sense, and don't hinder the existing gameplay at all. But there are notably less voices in Frenzy, which could be good or bad, depending how patient you are in listening to them between each room in Berserk. The sound in Berserk and Frenzy is minimal, but good overall. The sounds of the shots and enemies blowing up are rewarding and satisfying. Likewise, the sound of the player dying is intense and appropriate. And intense describes this game well, as it gets very difficult in later levels, avoiding all the fast-moving enemies and their flurry of bullets. Not to mention the Evil Auto. This could possibly be one of the first horror games that many people have experienced. I still get a rush of adrenaline and dread when I hear the call of Evil Auto and see that bouncing head coming my way. I'm also really impressed with the quality of the voice samples. I think this game isn't using anything too crazy inside the cartridge, so I'm not sure how this voodoo was pulled off, but I love it. Graphically, these games are pretty close to the arcade. Really, outside of the color, I think they're near perfect, but don't quote me on that. All the rooms and enemies are one solid color, usually things like blues, whites, pinks, turquoises, and so forth. But it all looks good, and the animation of your little human running is really good too. But that's really all there is to speak of graphically. The game is pretty bare bones to look at, but that's fine, because in late levels there is a ton of bullets and enemies running around, which is impressive in and of itself. And with that, well, I don't think there's too much more to say about Frenzy on the Atari 7800. Is it perfect? Nearly, but not quite. The only major flaw I found is that enemies can shoot you through the corners of the walls occasionally, when they shouldn't be able to. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen from time to time. I think I counted about 3 times during my playthrough for this video. Again, not major, but noticeable, and can lead to some anger if you get hit and killed. Frenzy and Berserk may also be a bit too hard for soft gamers out there. It's a challenge, especially in later levels. But I know gamers that just can't make it more than a few screens. And that's a shame, really, as they're missing out on a fun and intense experience. It can also get repetitive, but not as fast as you might think. It's crazy how such a simple idea can be fun without getting old really fast. But I think we can break this game down a little better in our totally awesome Atari Network pros and cons section. For the pros, while this game isn't impressive looking by any means, there can be an impressive amount of enemies and bullets on the screen. The inclusion of 2 games for as low as $35 is a great value, and all the multiplayer options are just an incredible treat for people with friends. Not me, but, other people who have friends. The voices are included and sound really good on the 7800. Both games also play perfectly, and provide an intense and maybe even frightening challenge for some. For the cons, I don't have many, but let's point out a thing or two. The enemies occasionally shoot through the walls, which can be upsetting if you get hit. It doesn't happen often, mind you, but very occasionally it can. These games are also difficult for players not up to the challenge, and the game can become repetitive during especially long play sessions. But with all that said, I think it's fair to give Frenzy for the Atari 7800 Pro system 4 Pro-Line controllers out of 5. It's near perfect, and for many people, well, I think they'd call it perfect. It was close to getting a 5, but I usually get a little tired of the repetition after a while. But still, it's a solid game, and a great value on the Atari 7800. Good job, Pac-Man Plus and Atari Age. But now I want to hear from all of you. Have you played this version of Frenzy and Berserk? Do you agree with my score? Or do you prefer a different version of these games? Let me know all this and more in the comments down below. And please consider joining the Atari Network Discord to continue the discussion with other Atarians. It's fun, it's free, and it's simple to use. Link will be in the description. We also have merch if you want to rep the Atari Network. Links in the description. Finally, I want to give a massive shout out to my Patreons. Without their support, I couldn't be able to cover the things that I do for this channel. In return, I give them behind the scenes stuff and a shout out in every video. So thank you to my own Celestial, OG Hugo, Head Trauma Bob, Jolt 7800, Ball Gobbler, Socrates 63, Fens the Spook, and Mr. Shua TV. You are a group of classy Atarians, and I thank you for all the support. It means the world to me. Okay, guys, I'm the 7800 Pro Gamer, a man trapped in a maze with an evil robot and a bouncing happy face for all eternity here at the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. And remember to stay classy, Atarians. Double Dragon was created for release in the arcades by Technos Japan back in 1987. Some people referred to the game as a belt scroller, but today we know it as a side-scrolling beat-em-up game, and it was one of the first to popularize the genre. The arcade game featured large sprites that could wander all over the screen in just about any direction imaginable, all in an effort to get into an advantageous position in order to inflict damage on your opponents. And you had a wide variety of fighting moves at your disposal as well. It was a smash hit, and console ports followed on every popular console of the time. Most people agree that the Master System and NES versions are solid games, and each approach the gameplay of the original arcade release in a different way. But the one port that most people tend to ignore is the Atari 7800 version. When it comes to Double Dragon on Atari, I think the 2600 version gets all the curiosity of gamers, because it's such a weak console to pull the game off on. But today, I want to give that other Atari port of Double Dragon some love. So let's see if Double Dragon for the Atari 7800 is worth a spot in your collection, or if you can safely leave Marion behind in this version. But first, please subscribe if you enjoy the video. It helps the channel out so much more than you could ever know, and you'll be notified whenever we upload a video in the future. Okay, enough of that, let's get on with the review. Double Dragon was published by Activision and developed by Imagineering for release on the 7800 back in 1989. It was one of only 2 Activision games on the console, with the other being Rampage, and it comes in an awesome and unique yellow box with very cool artwork. Just like in every other Double Dragon game, you take on a gang of evil street thugs who kidnapped your girlfriend Marion. There is a 2-player simultaneous mode, so both Jimmy Lee and his brother Billy are represented in the game, which is nice.
And actually, there can be a ton of sprites on the screen at one time, and different looking sprites too. This isn't surprising if you know what the 7800 was programmed to be able to do, but for casual fans and people who are just getting into the 7800, well, this is an incredible revelation, I'm sure. Unfortunately, the player sprites and most of the enemy sprites, well, they just look really bad. They all have their chests hanging out, well, most of them do, and they don't resemble their arcade counterparts very much at all. The exception would be Abobo and the backgrounds, in my opinion. I actually think most of the levels look really good, and there's only an odd color choice here and there that kind of makes it, well, not great, but it's still really good. But the rest of the sprites, well, they're pretty abysmal. At least they animate well, as most of the moves look pretty good, and they're not difficult to pull off once you get the hang of the controls. The left button punches and the right button kicks, and you can hold both buttons together in order to jump. Using a combination of different directions and the buttons allows you to pull off headbutts, jump kicks, back kicks, and even the fabled back elbow smash. Most of the moves are fairly useless, and the only ones I find myself using are the back elbow smash and the back kick, with an occasional jump kick thrown in for variety's sake. But this isn't unique to this version of Double Dragon, as most of the ports have one move that is better than the rest. However, what is unique to this version is how the enemies behave, and understanding the enemy behavior is key if you want to make it far in this version of Double Dragon. You see, the enemies behave in one of two ways. First, they can just wander about the screen in an attempt to get behind you and get the jump on you. They will not attack when they are trying to accomplish this. Their second behavior is simply to attack you. And when they are doing this, well, you don't have much hope against them. They will almost always get the jump on you. So the secret to Double Dragon is to either A, attempt to hit your opponents when they are wandering about the screen, or B, try to back kick or elbow smash them before they can hit you. I'm not sure why they are programmed in this way, but it makes combat feel very robotic and not fluid. In every other Double Dragon game, I feel like I'm fighting my opponents, and I feel like I'm a better karate technician than they are. But in this one, well, I just feel like I'm gaming the system in order to win, and it's not a great feeling. You also have access to a few weapons, but nowhere near everything that was available in the arcades. You have the baseball bat, the whip, and the knife. Granted, I always thought these were the best weapons in the game, but it would have been nice to have the barrels and the crates as well. Weapons will be carried on the screen by enemies, and you'll need to knock them out of their hands in order to stand over them and pick them up with the left button. They feel good to use, but the animations are just kind of, well, they look dumb. For example, they swing the baseball bat with just one hand. It looks unnatural and silly. But what isn't silly in Double Dragon for the Atari 7800 is the music. The game doesn't have the additional power of the Poke chip, like that of Commando or Ball Blazer, and that's a shame. Double Dragon certainly was a franchise worthy of the additional horsepower. But somehow the developers were able to get several of the iconic songs to play during the game. You have the title screen music, a few level songs, and even the boss battle theme. It doesn't sound awful either, especially considering that the TIA chip is doing all the heavy lifting here. The sound effects aren't too bad either, but much like everything else, well, there's something a little goofy here. When a Bobo dies or grunts, he sounds like a car motor being revved. I always got a kick out of that as a kid, but luckily it's not abrasive to the ears. Just a bit odd, if I'm honest. You'll also traverse a nice variety of areas, and the game takes a little while to get good at, and to master. You'll start in a city, move on to a warehouse, venture into a forest and a cliffside, cross a bridge, and eventually storm the gang's fortress in order to rescue your beloved Marion. The final boss in this game is Machine Gun Willie, and you don't have to fight your brother or anything like that in this version. At least, not in single player. My experience with 2-player is limited, but from what I remember, it was alright. A fun novelty, but I remember being able to damage your brother, which wasn't great. Today, Double Dragon on the 7800 can command a price of $50 to $70 loose, and as much as $125 to $150 complete in box. It's getting up there, so let's head into the Atari Network pros and cons section, and see if it's a price worth paying, or if it's a game only worthy of emulating. And as we always do, we'll start with the pros. Double Dragon can be played in both 1 and 2 player modes, which is a welcome addition. You do have a nice variety of moves, and Billy and Jimmy Lee control very well. I do like the backgrounds, and I think the Abobo sprite is really well done. The music is pretty good too, especially when you realize that the TIA chip is doing it all. The 7800 isn't known for having tolerable sound, so Double Dragon does pretty good all things considered. It can be a fairly long game as it'll take a long time to master, and there's a decent number of levels. And finally, there can be an impressive number of sprites on the screen at any given time. But for the cons, well, we have to mention that outside of Abobo, the rest of the sprites are pretty bad. They all have their chests out for some reason. There are a few bad animations too, like the animation for swinging the baseball bat. In 2-player mode, you can damage your ally, which I've always hated in these type of games. Also, fighting devolves into using the same move over and over again, waiting for enemies to wander around so they won't fight back. It doesn't feel like a natural fight, if that makes sense. The game scrolls the screen as well, but when the screen is scrolling, it can bog down the frame rate. And finally, there are times where you can lose life after life, and it can become downright frustrating. This happens less once you get the hang of everything, but until then, you'll probably become frustrated a few times while playing. So when taking the good with the bad, I think it's apparent that Double Dragon for the Atari 7800 has earned 2 Pro Line controllers out of 5. It's another game that I've learned to love over the years, much like Scrap Hero Dog, but objectively it's just not that good of a game. It all comes down to how the developers implemented the enemy behavior. Fighting in the Sega Master System and the NES version feels good. Here it feels like a chore, especially when you're learning how to play the game. Most people get whooped on their first few times playing and they just give up. And that's not the sign of a good game. If you're willing to learn how to play the game, then it does open up a fair bit. But today you can play any other version, including the arcade one, with absolute ease. It's hard to go back to this one and recommend it over those versions of Double Dragon. But the box is cool though, so collectors might want it just for that reason alone. But enough of what I think, it's time to hear from all of you. Have you played Double Dragon on the Atari 7800? If so, do you like it, or do you agree with the score that I gave the game? Which version of Double Dragon is your favorite and why? Let me know about all this, and whatever else you have to say in the comments down below. And don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the video. I'd also like to take this moment to thank the following classy Atarians for supporting the Atari Network on Patreon and via YouTube memberships. Thanks to your support, the channel can continue to grow and go strong. You can support the channel by heading over to patreon.com/7800progamer. So thank you to My Own Celestial, OG Hugo, Head Trauma Bob, Jolt 7800, Ball Gobbler, Socrates63, Pens the Spook, Mr. Shua TV, Jeremiah Thomas, HughJass79, DF, and Braylon. You guys rock, and I couldn't do this without you. And with that, it's time to wrap up yet another review on the channel. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a man whose girlfriend was kidnapped outside of my garage, while me and my brother just stood next to our Camaro and did nothing. And I'd like to thank you for watching another video from the evil gang known as the Atari Network. Until next time, remember to stay classy, Atarians. Boy, things sure have changed in video games since I was a child. Growing up, the heroes of games and protagonists in general were action heroes akin to Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone. Otherwise, they would be cute characters or young kids who obtained powers, or who went on epic journeys that we would fantasize about when playing outside. But today, well, it seems that anybody can star in their own video game, and this is evident by the game that we're featuring today. Millie and Molly are two silver-haired grannies who are on a mission to clear every stage of the villainous teddy bears and bugs who have taken up residence in their cartridge. The question is, should you embark on this adventure with these great grannies, or should they have stayed in the nursing home and left the starring roles of video games to the muscle-bound madmen of yesteryear? Let's find out. Millie and Molly was released by Atari Age in 2023 at PRGE, and recently, as of March of 2025, the Atari Age web store copies have started shipping and getting into the hands of gamers everywhere. It's a port of the Commodore 64 homebrew developed by Carlton Handy and published by Bitmapsoft, with the 7800 port being done by Matthew Smith, Mark Sarna, Bobby Clark on the music, and QA work being done by Robert Tuccito? I'm sorry, Robert. And Steve Ramirez. I believe they are collectively working under the name Chunky Pixel for this release and possible future releases. And if you follow the Atari 7800 homebrew scene, or lurk around the Atari Age forums, then you don't need me to tell you that these are some very talented homebrew devs on the console. Anyway, Millie and Molly doesn't really have a story to speak of, and it isn't needed either. This is a sort of single-screen platforming puzzle game, with some really cool mechanics that are unique on the Atari 7800. You will take control of either Millie, Molly, or the two at the same time, as you clear every screen of enemies in an effort to make it as far as possible into the game. And it uses a smart, 6-digit password system to allow you to pick up where you left off, which you're going to need if you want to see the later levels. And that's because there are 100 levels to clear in this game. That's a lot of bang for your buck, so if you're into these kinds of games, then the value is certainly here. But how does Millie and Molly play? Well, how fortuitous that you asked, because that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. You might expect to run, attack, jump, and platform typical to other games in the genre, as you clear the levels. But remember, these ladies are in their golden years. They don't jump, they don't run, and they don't swat bad guys with a cane. They simply walk. That's it. Your attack is to walk into the side of the defenseless enemies who are minding their own business. Or maybe they're loitering. Yeah, that's it. They're loitering. They're guilty of loitering. And you must stop them at all costs. Anyway, Millie and Molly can't die, no matter what they touch or run into. And it would be pointless for them to do so anyway. And that's because they have the ability to stop and rewind time. That's right, similar to games like Braid, you can rewind past a recent mistake and fix the errors of your past. And it makes for a very smart and ultimately unique way of doing things. You'll need to traverse ladders, sand piles, rocks, and hovering platforms in order to clear every level. Holding the left button rewinds things on the fly, while a short press will switch between the two silver-haired heifers if they are both available. Holding the right button allows for you to access the menu that's always shown on the right side of the screen. And here you can once again choose to rewind, start the level over, exit the level, and of course, go back to playing. It all makes for a gameplay experience that is unique, fun, and dare I say challenging. The game pulls you in, and before you know it, you've sunk an hour or two into the early easy levels, and you start to get into the meat and potatoes of Millie and Molly. I have a feeling that even if you aren't normally fans of this genre, its charm and unique time-altering abilities will at least intrigue you enough to sink some time into their adventure. It's incredibly rewarding to be stuck on a level and finally see the answer appear before you and clear the stage. And of course, you are rewarded with yet a more difficult and challenging level for your efforts. And I couldn't be happier about that. Using the ladders, the falling rocks, barrels, and other movable objects, and the enemies themselves to make new platforms accessible is simply great. And addictive. But it's the game's presentation that really drives home what a unique and fun experience that this game really is. The 7800 isn't known for great audio, but you wouldn't know that if this was your first experience on the system. Of course, the cartridge has some help in the form of the Pokey, or probably Hokey chip in this scenario, that is doing some of the heavy lifting with the audio. But Hokey, Pokey, or Nopey, it doesn't matter, because the sound is robust and just very well done. The tune that plays when you clear a level is just so perfect, and I couldn't be happier to hear this sound coming out of my Pro system. Bobby Clark really outdid himself here, and I understand that it's all pokey renditions of the C64 SID chip music, but all that aside, it's still just great. I'm in love with the sound here, and it's such a treat to listen to. Graphically, the game is fine too. The girls look as you would expect, and the enemies and environments look great. It all reminds me of NES-style graphics, if I'm honest, but they are probably more akin to Commodore 64 stuff. You know, since this is a port of a Commodore 64 homebrew and all. Personally, I think the girls look a little odd on the password screen, but hey, that's really just me nitpicking. The game looks great, it plays great, and God, it sounds amazing. I think we all know I'm going to give Millie and Molly a high score, but let's head into the old folks' home, known as the pros and cons section, and see how high Millie and Molly can get in their old age. For the pros, I want to start with the music and sound. It's just superb. Excellent stuff, especially for the Atari 7800. The game looks decent too, and I like most of the graphics. But the gameplay, well, the gameplay is excellent. The girls can't do much, but the time-altering elements are well implemented, and they add a nice layer of depth. Heck, it even makes the game more approachable in my opinion. There is a lot of game here, and it should take most people some time to clear all 100 levels of Millie and Molly. And the password system is really well done. But I do have some cons, and let's start with the gameplay. It's probably going to be hard for some people to come to grips with the fact that these old bats can't jump or fight. And that's fine, it's worth learning how to utilize ladders and barrels to achieve your goals. But I'm sure it will turn off some closed-minded gamers. And Millie and Molly look a little odd on the password screen. But that doesn't count for much, especially when they look good everywhere else. So after weighing the pros and cons, I have no hesitation in giving Millie and Molly, for the Atari 7800 Pro system, 4 Pro-Line controllers out of 5. This game is excellent, and it might get lost among the other amazing titles available over at Atari Age, but you shouldn't ignore these great grandmas. And I mean, they're great, and they're grandmas, not great-grandmas. I mean, I guess they could be great-grandmas. I'm losing the point. Anyway, don't skip over Millie and Molly, especially if you love platforming puzzle games. But you've all heard what I had to say, now I want to hear from all of you. Have you tried Millie and Molly? Do you agree with my score or my review? If not, where did I lose the plot at? And if you haven't played it, do you think you'd be willing to give it a try? Also, have you played the Commodore 64 original? And if so, how does this one compare to that? Let me know about all this and so much more in the comments down below. Also, some of you may notice that we no longer have a Patreon or YouTube memberships. This channel is completely supported with likes, comments, and of course subscriptions. So if you enjoyed the content, then doing any one of those things helps out a ton. And I can't thank you all enough for the support. And with that, it's time to wrap up another review here on the channel. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a man who loves his grandma, and visits her at the old folks' home known as the Atari Network weekly. And I'd like to thank you all for watching. And please remember to stay classy, Atarians. Atari has announced a ton of new releases coming this November for their Plus line of consoles. They announced collections of 2600 games like the Epics Collection, Real Sports Collection, and the M Network Collection that they recently obtained the rights to. But more interesting to a lot of fans is the standalone games. Bounty Bob Strikes Back, coming to the 7800 for the first time ever, Frenzy and Berserk, Bentley Bear's Crystal Quest, and the subjects of this video, Asteroids Deluxe and Space Duel. And the truth is that these two games are extremely similar to one another, both in execution and in gameplay. So let's take this opportunity to review both titles for you, and find out if Space Duel and Asteroids Deluxe is worth the $30 price tag, or if you should pass them up in favor of another 7800 release that Atari has made available. Let's find out. Space Duel for the 7800 was programmed by Robert De Crescenzo and published by Atari Age back in 2007. It's based off of the original 1982 release from Atari that followed Asteroids and Asteroids Deluxe. And speaking of Asteroids Deluxe, that game was also programmed by Robert De Crescenzo and published by Atari Age in 2007 for the Atari 7800, and is based on the 1980 Atari arcade game. Both of these 7800 releases have a lot of similarities in how they play and in their overall design, so I'll generalize a lot for both titles. However, there are some differences, and I will point those out. Both games try to emulate the original vector-style graphics from the arcade, but it's clear that Space Duel does so with a lot more color and vibrancy. But if you're hoping for the three-dimensional colored rocks of the original GCC Asteroids, well, you'll be greatly disappointed. I personally never cared for pseudo-vector-style graphics on home consoles of this era. The actual look and sharpness of true vector displays just can't be emulated on your home television. But neither of these games look bad. They're just not to my taste. I would describe the graphics as simple, but they get the job done. What is impressive from these releases is the amount of modes available. It feels like it follows GCC's original 7800 Asteroids a bit, but man, there are just so many multiplayer options available. And I won't be able to show really any of it off, because I'm a lonely old man, I guess. Available from the main menu is 4 levels of difficulty, and they seem to increase the amount and the speed of the space rocks, along with which spaceships will show up on the screen, between the big and small one. You can also choose between 1 and 2 player modes, and that's nice in itself, but there's more options than just 1 or 2 player. You have cooperative 2-player and competitive 2-player, so you can either choose to work together or fight each other. It's simple but brilliant. And I will say here and now, if you have another person waiting to enjoy these games with you, well, then you can't go wrong with these games. You'll have a blast in 2-player mode, but if you're a fan of Space Duel from the arcades, you'll notice that something is missing from 2-player mode, and that's the tethering. I'm not sure why this wasn't included, honestly. Maybe Bob tried and couldn't get it to work? I'm not sure, but for fans of the original, it makes Space Duel feel like, well, Asteroids Deluxe, giving little reason to buy both cartridges. This major element of the arcade original is greatly missed here, and many fans will be disappointed that it's not included. There isn't much to say about gameplay, really. I'll go over it for completion's sake, but I'm pretty sure you all know how Asteroids plays at this point. Well, I would hope you do. You start in the center of the screen, and have to avoid several asteroids that flow in and wrap around the screen. Each time you shoot a large boulder, it will split off into several smaller rocks. This happens twice until they finally blow up in small, insignificant pieces. If a piece is going to hit you, then you can hit a button and use a shield to protect yourself. But in Asteroids Deluxe, you'll be sent flying across the screen more often than not, which could result in a death regardless. This seems to have been improved in Space Duel from what I can tell. You move your ship by using the joystick or D-pad to point in the direction you want to go, and then pressing the button to propel yourself forward. You can gain insane amounts of momentum and speed, and fly quickly around the screen, but this isn't recommended. Instead, you want to do small, slow, and deliberate movements if you want to get to that elusive high score. In Space Duel, you're not really fighting asteroids, but rather colorful shapes. You'll have boxes and star-shaped stuff, along with little circles that will require a ton of shots to destroy. These shots stick them in place, allowing for multiple to hit if you're safe to do so. And all these small differences really help to keep things fresh from Asteroids Deluxe. Shoot these and you'll find yourself in a bonus level where you shoot different white shapes. And then you do it all over again. The variety in enemies, colors, and shapes do go a long way in keeping things fresh and different here. But there's no escaping that at its core, Space Duel is the same game as Asteroids Deluxe. Moving on to the sound design, it's fine, but can be described as sparse. This helps to add to the hopelessness of being stuck in deep space alone, trying to survive where you really never could. The shots sound good, and despite how often you hear them, well, they never got annoying. Besides that, you'll hear the rocks blow up and occasional otherworldly noises, as you would expect. The sound is expanded a little bit in Space Duel overall, but it's minimal in both games, and works fine given the history of the arcade games and what it's trying to convey. The games control and play fine, and fans of Asteroids will feel right at home with these versions. The missing tethering mechanic from Space Duel is a head-scratcher, though. It makes it feel like an incomplete version of an arcade classic. I won't be taking these games into the Atari Network pros and cons section, because it would take too long in my opinion to do both of them. But just know that these games look fine with the graphics, have addictive gameplay, fantastic two-player options, and mysterious sound that helps to build on the idea of being alone in space. Space Duel is missing elements that makes it a confusing release, and I have no doubt that some people would have rather had the 3D rocks from the original 7800 Asteroids. And other than that, some people might wonder why these weren't lumped together in a single Asteroids collection. But with all that said, well, both games are going to receive a score of 3 Pro-Line controllers out of 5. They're fun, they play well, and the 2-player modes really push them beyond what they would have been otherwise. But personally, I will always prefer GCC's Asteroids to Bob DeCrescenzo's version. I find the original 7800 release more challenging and, well, no offense, but better looking. But Asteroids Deluxe is fine, and Space Duel changes things up enough to make it feel more substantial. But the missing elements from the arcade, well, again, it's a true head-scratcher. Had the tethering been included, then Space Duel could have easily been a 4 out of 5, or maybe even a 5 out of 5 depending how it had been implemented. But if you're in the market for a new Asteroids game for your Atari Plus console, well, then pick them up. You can't go wrong, and you'll have a lot of fun. But there's really no need to grab both. Get Asteroids Deluxe if the classic, original Asteroids motif means something to you, and pick up Space Duel if you want something that's a little more deep than the original. But now that I've got my thoughts out there for you all to hear, well, I want to hear what your thoughts are on these games. Have you played them already, or are you waiting for them to release this November from Atari? Do you agree with my score, or am I going mad from isolation in space? And do you think they were good choices for a release on the 7800 Plus? Let me know about all this and whatever else you want to say in the comments down below. And please, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. We put out 2 videos a week, so hit the bell icon to be notified whenever we upload. And are you tired of waiting for new videos to come out? Well, become a YouTube member for $5 a month, and you'll get access to videos a day before anybody else. If you want to keep up with the Atari Network's latest thoughts and news, then become a Patreon for $2 to $5 a month for exclusive audio updates. Both get you exclusive content, live streams, and watch-alongs as well. Grab a YouTube membership off YouTube, or head over to patreon.com/7800ProGamer to support the channel just as these classy Atarians have. Thanks to their help, the Atari Network continues to grow and go strong. So thank you. You guys rock, and I couldn't do this without your help. And with all that, it's time to wrap up another video review here on the channel. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, and I hope you enjoyed my take on Space Duel and Asteroids Deluxe. And until next time, please remember to stay classy, Atarians.
Astro Smash was one of the killer apps for the Intellivision back in 1981, and if there's one thing I know, it's that the great, wise, and powerful Robert DeCrescenzo loves porting Pac-Man games and killer apps to the Atari 7800. And I'm sure there were Atari fans back in the 80s that wish they had access to stuff like Astro Smash. So if you're one of those people, then your dreams have come true. Meteor Shower is a reimagining of Astro Smash that was released on the Atari 7800 back in 2011, and can currently be purchased from Atari Age for as low as $35. And when it comes to cartridge games, that's a pretty good price. It also comes in either a red box or a blue box, and you know what that means. Gotta catch 'em all. Actually, both versions are exactly the same, but you can grab whichever color you like best. But the question we need to answer is, should you grab either color of Meteor Shower, or let this port of Astro Smash stay on the Intellivision where it belongs? Let's find out. Meteor Shower is about as simple as these old games can come, as you move your ship along the ground left and right as you shoot at and avoid several falling obstacles. The majority are meteors, or as the manual calls them, rocks. But eventually you'll come up against spinners, dive bombers, and eventually saucers. You want to shoot down as many of these enemies as possible for points, but should any get past your defenses, then your score actually goes down. So you can play slow and take your time to aim your shots perfectly, but your score is going to plummet if you do so. So for this reason, Meteor Shower promotes fast, hectic gameplay, and will cause you to get into situations where you're not making wise decisions. You can push down on the joystick to do a teleport, but it's impossible to tell where you're going to end up, and I find it does more damage than good. Still, if you're smart about when and where you use this maneuver, it could save your skin. Graphically, everything is bright and vivid on the 7800, and even more so on the 2600 Plus. Well, usually, but the background changes color at different intervals, and some of the color choices really wash everything out. This was by design, but I can't help but to feel that some of the colors look better than others, and wiser choices could have been made. The color changing backgrounds also doesn't happen nearly enough to help with a sense of progression. I usually found myself wondering when the heck the color was going to change, as usually that's also when more obstacles are added and the game speeds up a bit. I do like the craters on the ground, as it looks like you're traveling the surface of the moon, but ultimately this game doesn't leave you with much to look at. Audio-wise, there really isn't much going on either. Most of the sounds consist of your shots coming from your ship, and the sounds of rocks blowing up to pieces. You get the sounds of the dive bombers and spinners coming onto the screen, and that's really it most of the time. Oh, and the saucers make sound effects too. With everything being so sparse, you would think I'd hate the sound, but outside of the annoying effects for the dive bombers, I don't find it all that bad. Now don't get me wrong, you can mute the television and crank up some good music, and you really won't miss a thing. But I didn't feel irritated by any of the audio either. Well, except for the dive bombers. So even though the audio is wholly unexceptional, I think it deserves a bit of a pass for using the TIA in a manner that didn't make my ears bleed. But after playing for a while, gathering footage for the review, I couldn't help but to think that I just wasn't having that much fun. Like I said, there really wasn't a feeling of progression, and the difficulty just increased a bit too slowly for my taste. Now, there is a 2-player simultaneous mode that I did not get to try, so that might be the savior for this game. But in single-player mode, it's just really too dull. Especially now that we have so many incredible homebrew for the Atari 7800. Robert DeCrescenzo himself did the excellent Pac-Man collections, Super Circus Atari Age, Crazy Bricks, Baby Pac-Man, and Bentley Bear's Crystal Quest. And any of those I'd play over this one in a heartbeat. But we still need to break it all down in the trademarked Atari Network Pros and Cons section. For pros, I do like some of the graphics, and they look incredible when the background is a solid color. The game has a unique scoring system where you can lose points just as fast as you gain them, and I haven't seen too many other games do that before. I do have to point out that Bob did a fair job with the audio, especially considering how much worse it could have been. The difficulty and speed also increases, and the game is quite a bit funner when things get hectic. But for the cons, I have to mention that sometimes the backgrounds wash out the colors, and the dive bombers can be annoying when it starts dropping repeatedly. But most of all, the game is pretty boring to play, especially when compared to what has released on 7800 since this one. The progression and difficulty is slow, and that takes the fun out of this one for me. Also, keep in mind that I did not try the 2-player mode, and that could be a savior for this game if you have a friend to play with. So with all that said, I'm going to give Meteor Shower for the Atari 7800 2 Pro-Line controllers out of 5. It's not an awful game, but in my opinion, it's a boring one. Things just progress too slowly, and that's in part because of the fact that you lose score just as fast as you gain it, and the score dictates when things ramp up within the game. But now I want to hear from you guys. Do you think I was too harsh on Meteor Shower? Have you played this one before, and if so, do you like it? And what about Astro Smash, the game that this is based on? Is that one any different? Sound off in the comments down below. And don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed this review. It helps the channel out a ton. And why not subscribe? We put out 2 videos a week, one review like this one, and one featured video every Thursday. We also do the Atari Network podcast with myself and co-host Funkmaster V from the Big and Funky Productions YouTube channel. You can catch the podcast every other Friday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4:30 Pacific. Next one will be on February 23rd, and we hope to see you there. Alright guys, I'm the 7800 Pro System Gamer, a nerd in desperate need of a meteor shower here at the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching my review of Meteor Shower. And remember, stay classy, Atarians. Baby Pac-Man was something so different and special that it would be nearly impossible to port to any console. Even the incredibly convenient MAME has a hard time emulating it properly. And why is that? Because the game has both the video game aspect that you would expect and a mechanical pinball aspect. And it's that mechanical pinball part that keeps it from being ported nearly anywhere. It keeps Baby Pac-Man itself from being as well known as the other Pac games. It would take either a person or team that is extremely talented, or very arrogant to even attempt such a port, especially on a console like the Atari 7800. But one man did just that. The great, wise, and powerful Robert DeCrescenzo and a team of valiant helpers led an effort to port Baby Pac-Man to the Atari 7800, and it was released back in 2019 via Atari Age. And while it's no longer available for purchase, Pac-Man Plus has made the majority of his pulled releases available for free download on the forums. So the question is, did he and his team succeed in porting this unique Pac-Man pinball game to the Atari 7800, or was it an epic failure of titanic proportions? Let's find out. First thing first, this Atari 7800 version of Baby Pac-Man works on the Atari 2600 Plus with no issues. All the gameplay found in this video was captured using my 2600 Plus. Okay, now on to business. The title screen is bright and vivid with a nice large Baby Pac-Man playing with a yo-yo, front and center. You can push any direction on the joystick to bring up the menu, and you get the usual excellent options that Bob puts into most of his modern Pac-Man ports. You can select between 1 or 2 players, and choose between starting with 2, 3, 4, or even 5 lives. You can also change some Baby Pac-Man specific options, like whether or not the Energizers are forgotten between levels, whether the ghosts follow classic 7800 Miss Pac-Man pathing, or the arcade accurate movements, and whether to play the whole game or just the mazes or pinball field. And that last option is nice if you struggle with one or the other and need specific practice. It also makes Baby Pac-Man the only pinball game available on the 7800, which is another cool fact. So after selecting your options, you are dropped into a maze, but it's not typical of other Pac-Man games. You'll notice the lack of power pellets in the corners, and there are openings on the bottom of the screen. And generally, I recommend heading to those openings as it drops you to the pinball field that would normally be found beneath the screen in the arcades. It's in the pinball portions where you will win the power pellets that you need to survive the maze and kill the ghosts. And there's a bit more going on in the pinball section than you might initially realize. It can be complicated to understand how you acquire everything, or what you are even working towards outside of the power pellets. So allow me to explain it a bit. So there's a silver ball resting in a tunnel at the top of the screen. It usually starts in the left position, and if you hit it with your pinball, well, then it'll swing to the right. This awards you with 1 power pellet. Then if you hit it back to the left, you're awarded with yet another pellet. You can also win a couple pellets by hitting the yellow buttons, which highlights the Pac-Man letters on either side of the center of the playfield. Once you spell Pac-Man, you are awarded with yet another power pellet, and this can be done up to 4 times. You can also light the arrows in the dead center of the maze to win a bonus baby. You do this by either spelling fruits or tunnel, or by hitting the blue button in the center of the yellow ones. Spelling fruit and tunnel also has another effect. Each time you successfully spell fruits by sending the ball through the side spinners, then you advance the fruit once. You start with cherries, but you can advance to oranges, bananas, etc. If you spell tunnels on the opposite side, then you increase the speed with which you travel through the tunnels on the side of the mazes. There is more here, but I'll leave all that to you to discover. But it should be apparent that there is a ton going on in the pinball portion. But the best part is that the pinball portion controls very well. I find good physics to be the most important part of any video pinball game, and I can't think of a single situation where Baby Pac-Man did not react the way I expected. Which is fantastic, especially when considering that this is a homebrew on a notoriously hard console to program for. I enjoy a good video pinball game from time to time, and Baby Pac-Man fits the bill nicely on the 7800, or any other console really. Now the pinball portion is excellent, but what about the mazes? Well, let me tell you, this is probably one of the hardest versions of Pac-Man I've ever played. Seriously, I don't know if it's because you don't always have access to the power pellets, or what it is, but I find these mazes to be extraordinarily hard. But it's not due to poor controls, I can tell you that. Quite the contrary, Baby Pac-Man plays great. But the ghosts do seem to give chase more often than in other Pac-Man games. I've found that changing their AI to classic from arcade helps to make things easier. Not easy, mind you, but easier than the other option. The mazes themselves are usually 2 colors, green and orange to start and so forth, and they look pretty good. Baby Pac-Man, the ghosts, the dots, they all look great to me. Even on the 2600 Plus, which sometimes brings to light weird graphical tricks that developers had to use in the past. But not here, everything looks bright, vivid, and perfect in the high-definition world. The pinball field is just the same, with great colors and accents all around. You have Mr., Mrs., and Baby Pac-Man all represented, along with different lights and pieces to interact with. It all looks great, and it fits together cohesively. The sound is pretty good, but it's much less spectacular than the gameplay and graphics. But that's more due to the limitations of the 7800 stock audio than anything else. You have the Pac-Man theme at the start of each life, but you can cut it off early to jump right in, which is nice for the impatient players out there. You get the normal waka waka sound, and the pinball effects all sound appropriate and great too. There really isn't any music to speak of, but I find that keeping the TV audio on and cranking up some personal favorite tunes are the way to go. If I haven't made it clear yet, then Robert DeCrescenzo, Kurt Woloch, and friends deserve all the praise in the world for making this arcade oddity come right home on my favorite console. But I think it's time we take a trip into the one-of-a-kind Atari Network pros and cons section to see what score Baby Pac-Man deserves. And as always, we'll start with the pros. Baby Pac-Man has plenty of useful options, from the number of players and lives to changing the ghost AI and which game modes you'd like to participate in. The pinball section plays great with excellent ball physics. The mazes play well too. Everything is colorful and looks great, even on high-definition televisions on the 2600 Plus. The sound is minimal and honestly predictable, but it's good as well. There's a lot more depth here than you might realize initially, but you can just play the mazes if you don't want the complexity of the pinball game. Overall, Baby Pac-Man is a great unique challenge on the 7800, and one you currently can't get many other places. For the cons, well, there isn't much, honestly. The mazes can be very hard, and it's probably due to the lack of power pellets. The enemy AI can be tweaked, however, which helps. Also, I don't know, I guess that's really my only complaint. I guess if you don't like Pac-Man games, you won't like the maze portion, but the pinball is so good, you'll probably enjoy that. So I won't even throw that in here. So I think it's obvious, but I have to say it out loud, that I'm going to give Baby Pac-Man on the Atari 7800 Pro system 5 Pro Line controllers out of 5. Baby Pac-Man is the second ever perfect Atari game we've looked at, and I'll be honest, it's a good one. The arcade/pinball machine is so rare that not many people have or will experience this game in person. But with the 7800 version, I'm actually fine with that. This is an incredible game for the console. Unfortunately, it's no longer available on cartridge from Atari Age, and they have been going for a small fortune on eBay lately. I do not recommend paying $500, $400, or even $300 on this game, especially when you can get a flash cart and experience it for much cheaper. Buy the new 7800 game drive and head over to the Atari Age forums and download the ROM from Robert DeCrescenzo's thread. I'll have it linked in the description of the video. But now I want to hear from you guys. Have you played Baby Pac-Man on the 7800? Or have you had the honor of playing the actual machine in the arcades? If so, do you like either version? Is it worthy of a perfect score in your opinion? Or did I overrate it? Let me know all this and more in the comments down below. And please leave a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe. We put out new reviews every weekend, and they span all generations of Atari. We even check out other things like controllers and stuff. We also do featured videos every Thursday on specific Atari topics. Last Thursday, we talked about Atari Red Label games, so why not check that out if you want to learn all about them. Also, please check out the Atari Network podcast every other Friday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 4:30 Pacific. Myself and co-host Vinny Vineyard from Big and Funky Productions talk about everything Atari, and we have fun with the chat. So please join us for that, and please consider becoming a Patreon. It helps the channel out a ton, and goes towards improving the content. You'll also get exclusive Discord access, videos and live streams, and access to contests and so much more. These classy Atarians have become Patreons, and I can't thank them enough for their support. You guys really are the best. Also, Atari Network merch. It's in the description, so check it out if you're interested. Okay guys, thanks for checking out our review of Baby Pac-Man. I'm the 7800 Pro Gamer, a rare survivor of the horrible Pac-Man fever from back in the day, and I want to thank you all for watching. And remember, stay classy, Atarians.
Last week we reviewed Zaku, Penguinette and Tailchow's first ever game here on the channel. And it's a game I specifically wanted to cover, because I love their other games so deeply. But I realized something while posting the Zaku review, and that's the fact that we never reviewed Penguinette's other game here on the channel. We featured it in the first iteration of Man vs 7800, with gameplay and commentary from myself and game creator Osman Tailchow Salemi. We've done an interview on the Atari Network podcast with Osmond about the game and his thoughts on Atari. I featured Ricky and Vicki on the new Man vs. 7800 livestream, and I've even made a YouTube short about the game. So I figured now would be a perfect time to get Ricky and Vicki out of my system and just review it once and for all on the Atari 7800. You can obtain it through Steam for $10 or less, and you can get it from Stone Age Gamer as a digital download code by buying the Atari 7800 game drive, which I also already reviewed, by the way. So let's see if Ricky and Vicki is worth picking up and playing in whatever way you can get your hands on it, or if it's a game that deserves to be left in the past and forgotten. Let's get to it. Ricky and Vicki was developed and published by PenguinNet for the Atari 7800 back in 2020. It was released about 10 years after their first game, Zaku, appeared on the Atari Lynx. Ricky and Vicki is meant to be primarily a two-player experience, where you have to work side by side with another person. It was meant to be a callback to games where you had to coordinate with a second player in order to help each other see the other side of your adventure. Again, we did an excellent interview with the developer of the game, so if you want to know more about its origins, I'll have that video linked in the description. With the focus being on multiplayer, it's clear that PenguinNet intended for you to play with another person as the main gameplay mode. But there is a single-player mode, and the single player is essentially an entirely different game. I'll be looking at the single player for this review, as nobody was available to play with me. But just know that this game is intended, first and foremost, to be a multiplayer experience. Ricky and Vicki might appear to be sort of a platforming adventure game at first glance, and honestly I thought the same thing when I first saw it. But at its core, it's a puzzle platformer, where you'll need to solve increasingly elaborate situations in order to progress. The challenge comes from these puzzles. Now, while some people might be disappointed by this fact, well, I find the gameplay to be fantastic. And even when going back for additional playthroughs, this game can be challenging, as I forget the solutions to the puzzles and end up having to solve everything all over again. And that's because there is a lot of game to conquer here. You have several worlds with many levels in each of them, capped off with an intricate boss battle that we'll talk more about later. Ricky and/or Vicki must utilize boxes to solve puzzles and defeat enemies. With these boxes, you can reach higher platforms, turn on or off lights, put out fires, turn off and on switches, and so much more. Each world will introduce more nuance and challenges that you must conquer if you want to save your kids from the Misery Dragon. And that's a perfect segue into the story. One thing that Atari 7800 games, and Atari games in general, aren't known for is their stories. Of course, every game has some sort of story, but they almost always feel like an afterthought on Atari systems. But here, we have an opening cinematic that conveys what's going on brilliantly. It even presents the personalities of each character masterfully, and it's part of the incredible charm of the game. The artwork and graphics are phenomenal, and it's like nothing else seen on the console. I can't stress enough how nuts we would have gone over this game if it had come out back in the 80s. It's everything I ever wanted to see on my 7800. The Misery Dragon has kidnapped Ricky and Vicki's children and taken them down to his quote-unquote theme park called Miseryland. Once there, you have to fight your way through 6 caverns to rescue the kids and put an end to the evil Misery Dragon. Along the way, you'll meet Dut, the lovable salesman, I guess, that doles out hints and extra lives in exchange for lowering your score. And again, the characters, enemies, and bosses all have great design and personalities that shine through. The caverns themselves are a series of one-screen levels, where you're presented with everything you need to know front and center. It's up to you to figure out how to get around the challenge presented to collect all the keys and move on with the game. The backgrounds are always black, but the foreground elements add plenty of detail and let you know what kind of world you have just entered. You start in a sort of basic cavern, and then move along into an Egyptian-themed level, progress to a fiery pit, battle through a water/bubble world, enter a mechanical palace, and then cap things off in the Misery Dragon's lair. They're all different and look fantastic. and each introduces their own set of challenges, as I had mentioned before. But I think the highlight of the gameplay is the nice, large, and varied boss battles. Much like Zaku, the bosses are big and full of personality, but there are far less of them, which is okay. It makes them feel more special if you ask me. You'll first encounter a mole that you have to avoid and hit with boxes. It can be a little jarring at first with this first direct boss battle, because most of the time you've been doing puzzles and not really all-out combat. But it won't be long before you figure out the mole's weaknesses and take him down. You next take on an Egyptian pharaoh cat, then a phoenix, a sort of crazy crab thing, a big machine, and of course, the misery dragon himself. Each battle is unique, fun, and very much worth experiencing. And just as a reminder, the two-player bosses, much like the levels themselves, are completely different from the single-player experience. This is like 2 games in 1, honestly, and how cool is that? So the graphics and character designs are fantastic, but what might even be better than that is the sound. That's right, the sound in an Atari 7800 game is not only passable, but good. Dare I say great even? Well, yes I do. It was done by RushJet, and, well, I tip my hat to you, sir. You did a fantastic job here. The level songs are, once again, varied and change up a fair bit. You have calming and atmospheric music in some areas, and then intense and action-packed music in others, like the boss battle, for example. The sound design overall is well done, but the music is something to behold on the Atari 7800, and that's really saying something. Because we all know the sound on the Atari 7800, well, it's usually really bad. With all the compliments I've paid to the game so far, you might think it's perfect. Or that I personally think it's perfect. But there is something we need to address, and that's the difficulty. I've heard a lot of people say the game is hard. And when I first started playing Ricky and Vicki, well, I would have agreed 100%. But it's the kind of hard that I can get behind. You simply need to learn the game, the puzzles, and how everything works, and soon things become much more manageable. Even once you get used to the levels, I've heard people say that the bosses are even tougher than the game itself. And once again, that's probably true. Even to this day, I have a hard time with bosses like the Pharaoh Cat. But most of the battles is based on pattern recognition. You have to practice in order to get the patterns down pat and best the bosses. But if you lose all of your lives, you're taken back to the beginning level of that particular cavern. And that can be frustrating because you really need to sit and practice to conquer a particular boss or puzzle. It's almost unfair to expect a player to go all the way... Wait, what's this? Wait, Dutch shouldn't be here. Yeah, that's right. Penguinette and Tailchow even thought of a way to make the game more accessible to people having trouble. If you see the continue screen twice in rapid succession, our good friend Dut, the salesman, comes along and offers us unlimited life in exchange for no high score. By all means, take my stupid score. Just let me get through this incredible game. With stuff like this, it's clear that Penguinette put a lot of thought and love into their game. They wanted everybody to enjoy it and have a good time playing with it. It's a pretty unique experience on the Atari 7800, with little else like it on the console. If it had been on the NES or a similarly crowded console, it might not have got the recognition that it deserves. But since it's on the Atari 7800, it can really be appreciated, studied, and get the recognition that I think it should receive. I think Ricky and Vicki is great, but we need to take it into the Atari Network Pros and Cons cavern to see what score we can actually give it. And as always, we start with the pros. For the pros, I have to point out the brilliant puzzle-based gameplay. You utilize boxes through most of it, but in many different ways that keeps the gameplay fresh. The graphics are just dripping with personality. and I personally think it's one of the best looking games on the console. And RushJet provided the game with exceptional music. The sound design in general is just fantastic, really. You have 6 caverns to explore, with a few secrets to uncover as well. That's to say that this game should take people a long time to finish. And the 2-player game is a completely different experience, giving you essentially 2 games for the price of 1. The controls are responsive, and everything works well. But there is a con or two we have to bring up. And we'll start with the difficulty. Some people might find this game too hard. Even with the unlimited life system, it just might not be some people's cup of tea. And that's a shame because they're really missing out. Also, there is an issue where if you have something plugged into the second controller port, and you're playing single player, it can become impossible to hold on to boxes. So make sure you have nothing in that port when you play, just to be safe. And there's, that's it. So I think you all know what I'm going to do with this, but let's make it official. I give Ricky and Vicki for the Atari 7800 Pro system 5 Pro Line controllers out of 5. This game is one of the greatest on the console, and it's a treat for 7800 owners. Those of us that grew up with the 7800 dreamt of having games of this caliber, and it's so rewarding to finally have one. Unfortunately, it's no longer available from PenguinNet in cartridge form, and according to TaleChow, the game didn't sell very well overall. It's criminal that such an incredible game didn't perform as well as they needed. But don't fret, you can still play Ricky and Vicki while supporting PenguinNet and TaleChow by purchasing it on Steam for $10 or by getting the Atari 7800 game drive from Stone Age Gamer and having the ROM sent directly to your email. Don't let this gem pass you by. Experience it however you can. I promise that if you love Atari, homebrew games, and just fun games in general, then you'll have a good time. But now I want to hear from all of you. Do you think that Ricky and Vicki is a 5 out of 5 game? Or do you think it's overrated? Have you played it before? Were you lucky enough to grab a cartridge before the price bloated on eBay? And do you love the characters like Dutt and the Misery Dragon as much as I do? Let me know about all this and anything else you want to say in the comments down below. I look forward to hearing from you guys. We also have a Discord server where you can continue the conversation with like-minded Atarians. Link is in the description, and it's free to join. I also have a Patreon over at patreon.com/7800progamer. There you can support the channel for just $2 or $5 a month to help it continue to grow. In exchange, I provide exclusive audio updates, member-only videos, live streams, and even watch-alongs. If you feel that my videos give you some value and enjoyment, then please consider becoming a Patreon or a YouTube member. The following classy Atarians have done just that, and I couldn't have come this far without them. You guys rock, and I can't thank you enough for becoming Patreons and supporting the channel. And with all that said, it's time to wrap up our review of Ricky and Vicki on the Atari 7800. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a miserable dragon that lives in an amusement park of evil and mayhem, known as the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. And until next time, stay classy, Atarians.
Well, I'll be honest. This isn't a fun review to do. Like, at all. You see, I plan on covering everything that Video 61 has released as far as homebrew games go. And so far, I have their complete 7800 collection. I reviewed Animal Keeper several months back, and I liked it. Then, I reviewed Venture back in December of last year, and I raved over it. It was by far their best release that I've played. But now we have to take a look at Delta Space Arena, which is an interpretation of Omega Race. If you've played Omega Race before, then you know that it's kind of this weird Asteroids thing set on a sort of racetrack, I guess, and it's just always been kind of odd to me. But I think people out there really like it. So is this a good version of a game I'm already not big on? Or is this something to be skipped? And I'll be objective as I always am. So if this is a good version of Omega Race, I'll tell you. But I unfortunately think that might not be the case. I was patiently waiting for Video 61's next Atari 7800 release after Animal Keeper and Venture, because I feel the guys over there are really on a roll, and they have some exciting stuff in the works, at least in my opinion. I honestly can't wait for the 7800 version of Tile Smashers. But we got Delta Space Arena after those games, and as I said, Omega Race was never really my bag. But given the excellent track record of Video 61 and their programmer Peter, I knew I was going to pick this one up ASAP. And I have to say that the plain white text label on the cartridge isn't doing the game any favors. It didn't increase my excitement for playing it, let's just say that. But the label does not matter, it's what's on the inside of the cartridge that counts. So I fired up Delta Space Arena, and I have to say, the boring label reflects what's on the cart well enough. There are some brilliant ideas here. I like the idea of the power-ups. I like the different enemies and the different layouts of the stages. Heck, the difficulty progresses in a fantastic way too. But for every positive, there is an overwhelming negative as well. So let's just start with the graphics. Now to me at least, it's very apparent that this was originally an Atari 5200 game. Something about it screams 5200 to me, which is not a bad thing, mind you. But I don't feel like it's really pushing that console or this one. I sort of find it graphically boring if I'm being honest. But I could forgive that if it wasn't for all the flicker and slowdown. The 7800 is known for being able to push sprites like crazy, without the flicker of its competition at the time. But this game feels like it's just not programmed well. All the enemies sort of dance in and out of view, and if it's on purpose or a chosen graphical touch, then I think it was an extremely poor one. But I don't think it was on purpose. Overall, I couldn't help but to be disappointed by what I was seeing. Now, Video 61 games always use stock audio on the Atari 7800, at least as far as I know. But I don't expect anything crazy like pokey audio. But again, the audio here feels boring at worst and just too safe at best. There's little jingles that play, but often I hear one sound getting cut out for others, and there was nothing that made me want to keep on listening while I was playing. The sound, much like the graphics, were a major letdown to me. So unfortunately, Delta Space Arena and the guys at Video 61 are 0 for 2 at this point in my review. But we have gameplay next, and that could be a saving grace. And to an extent, it is. Like I said, I always found Omega Race to be an odd game in more ways than one. But I do like this interpretation as far as gameplay goes. The control feels reminiscent of Asteroids, but you do have some options in your control method. The left button always engages your thrusters and moves your ship forward, and the right button is always your brake. And let me tell you, this baby stops on a dime, which is absolutely needed if you don't want to slam into enemies and obstacles repeatedly. But you can also choose what pushing back on the joystick does. You can have it do nothing, you can have it move you in reverse, but be aware that you're going to reverse the same way you move forward using the momentum mechanics, so it's sort of slow to activate. You can also have pushing back on the joystick make you stop, which is essentially the same as the right button, but it might be easier to pull off in a pinch. But my favorite, by far, is making it reverse your direction, giving you the ability to escape or dodge enemy fire quickly. Now what I mean is rather than using the momentum-based thruster to move you backwards, it points you in the opposite direction immediately, and you start moving that way. This is what I recommend you set down on the joystick to if you want to give this game a try. And as I said earlier, there is a nice difficulty curve. The game is very easy at first, with only one enemy that really fires at you and leaves behind little hard-to-see mines. The other enemies just sort of follow the track until you destroy the single enemy capable of shooting. Then, one of those simple, do-nothing enemies transform into the next firing enemy. And eventually you'll have some variety, as there are enemies who move faster, enemies who shoot where you are rather than in random directions, and more. The layouts of the stages change in interesting ways that let you sort of ambush and intercept the enemies in ways that can be really fun and strategic. While I do think the game is a bit on the easy side, at least when you master the controls, it can be fun. But there is one major flaw that I mentioned earlier that ruins the experience for me, and that flaw is the slowdown. As things ramp up and the game gets more chaotic and challenging, they also get slower and the flicker seems to get worse. I'm just not sure why the fellas released this game in this state. Again, Omega Race was never up my alley, but I would have called it an average game and a fun one for fans of the original. But as it stands, due to these major flaws, I can't recommend you spend money on this one. Not when you can get Animal Keeper and Venture instead. Those games have a fun factor and a sense of quality that I believe this one is missing. And I don't want to bash on homebrew games and make the developers feel bad. That's never my goal. These guys do things I could never do. But I also have an obligation to protect my viewers' money and advise them where to spend it when it comes to Atari stuff. And as we're going to find out in my trademarked Atari Network pros and cons section, you just might want to stick your money somewhere else for the time being. Let's start with the pros. I really enjoy the level design here, and I like the idea of the power-ups. The difficulty increases in a smooth manner, and I think a variety of control options was a smart idea. But unfortunately, we're already at the cons, and I have some major ones to touch on. And let's start with the flicker and slowdown. I cannot forgive this on an Atari 7800 game. It negatively affects the gameplay in a major way, and it makes it not really worth playing. It needed more time in the oven, I think, and those issues needed ironed out. But there's also the power-ups that also feel like a big miss to me. It isn't evident enough what they do, and the power-up with the K just outright kills you. I'm never a fan of negative power-ups, especially ones that make you die out of nowhere. The graphics and sound are a bit boring, and something I just never really felt impressed by. That's why we're going to give Delta Space Arena for the Atari 7800 2 Pro-Line controllers out of 5. I suggest you support any and all homebrew developers by purchasing the games that interest you and the games you like. But this one isn't a good purchase. Instead, head over to Video 61 and buy some new or used Atari 2600 and 7800 games, or better yet, homebrews like Venture and Animal Keeper. Those games have more intriguing gameplay and audio, and overall are very good and well programmed. But with all that said, I want to hear from you guys. Have you played Delta Space Arena? If so, do you agree with my review, or do you disagree? Also, have you played Omega Race before? Do you like that game? Well, let me know this and more in the comments down below. And with all that said, it's time for me to sign off. I'm the 7800 Pro Gamer, Delta Space Cadet here at the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for joining me in another review. Remember to stay classy, Atarians, and I'll see you in the next one. Oh, Jinx. I have a history with this game. I've alluded to it in the past, but I haven't fully divulged it on this channel yet. As I mentioned numerous times, I had a 7800 growing up, but our library of actual 7800 games was small. There was some I forgot about and recently remembered after finding our old manuals and talking with my family. We had Miss Pac-Man on the 7800, Choplifter, Pole Position 2 of course, Rampage, and a few others. Most of our Atari games were hand-me-down 2600 stuff, and I was fine with that. But later in life, when I decided to collect for several video game consoles, the 7800 was one I remembered looking into. And there was a few games that stood out to me in the library. One of those games was Jinx, and I was really intrigued by it. I always loved Breakout-style games, and I enjoy things like Super Breakout, Arkanoid, and the recent Quant 2. And as far as I could tell, Jinx looked to be sort of a level-based exploration game using a ball and paddle. It seemed pretty cool. But I was ultimately disappointed with it all those years ago, and haven't went back to it very often. So let's find out if I was right to be disappointed in this hybrid-style game, or if I was missing something that changes everything for myself, and maybe even everybody watching.
Welcome.
Jinx was released in 1989 for the Atari 7800, and was originally programmed by Diamond Arts for various computers. The Atari port was published by Atari Corp, and was credited to Soft Gold according to the game's title screen. Moby Games credits the programming to US Gold, but I'm not sure what proof they have of this. Regardless, Jinx begins fairly impressively, with a clear voice sample taunting you by saying, "You can't catch me," and a yow before some melodic music starts playing. And the title screen looks really good on the 2600 Plus, which Jinx is absolutely compatible with. You can press any direction on the main menu to see high scores, but there is no real options available to us. The only thing you can really do on the menu is just start the game. And once you do, you're greeted with a whole lot of pink. There's a ball bouncing on the far left of the screen, and eventually a blue triangle appears on the center of the screen. You control the triangle and have free movement around the level. You can move anywhere you want to that isn't occupied by an obstacle, and you can turn the triangle upside down with the press of either button. You'll need to hit the ball with the curved side of the triangle in order to get it moving in any other direction other than up. As you bounce the ball, you'll hit various bricks and silver icons for points. There are obstacles that you must avoid that usually comes in the form of drills and bluish objects that follow simple patterns.
The ball can pass through these things unharmed, but you must make sure to avoid the mouth icon with the ball. Otherwise, it'll be gobbled up. You appear to have 2 lives, and you lose 1 if you destroy the triangle, or allow the ball to be eaten. The triangle can take 2 hits before it's destroyed, with the first hit reducing its size, which obviously makes it harder to hit the ball. If you find a triangle icon and hit it with the ball, you can return it to normal size. It all sounds well enough, and if you didn't know better, you might think that Jinx could be fun. And I have to admit that I do occasionally enjoy my time with it. But more often than not, Jinx is a struggle against odd trajectory and bounces, and has really annoying sound effects. Not to mention the truly ugly looking levels. The colors and background choices for all 4 of the included levels are just really hard on the eyes, especially on original hardware and a CRT television. But I have to admit that it looks a bit better on the 2600 Plus. Still, I'm not sure why the developers chose the colors and backgrounds that they did, because to me, well, they just look bad. The sound can be equally as bad as I mentioned before. The title screen music and tunes that play between levels are actually fairly good. I honestly like them for the most part. But during gameplay, the music is gone, replaced by the constant bouncing sound of the ball, along with some different sounds for pinging off the environment, obstacles, and collectibles. The ball can also get stuck in the environment or bounce off the triangle a bunch of times in rapid succession, making a truly god-awful sound that I absolutely couldn't stand. It was enough for me to just mute the TV for the rest of the time I was playing Jinx. And I usually try not to do that for reviews, but man, I really don't like this sound. But even with the god-awful sound, the biggest offense that Jinx pulls is the gameplay itself. As I had to mention, the ball takes weird bounces and seems to gain or lose momentum out of nowhere. It doesn't behave the way a good breakout game should, in my opinion, and I end up getting frustrated by the ball's reaction. There are obstacles you have to avoid, and some of them are actually really cool. Level 3 has some gravity orbs and spinners that make the ball move and react in cool ways, but most of the time you're just dealing with odd angled shapes that are hard to keep the ball away from, and it's really not fun to traverse the rest of the levels. Not to mention that they don't really have anything to show you outside of what you see on the first few screens. You can get a sense of what each of the 4 levels are all about just within the first few seconds of moving the ball. And you just play the same levels over and over again. Now they do get more difficult each time you re-enter them, which is nice, but I really wish there was at least another, say 4 levels to play through. It really would have added to the sense of progression and exploration. But I do have to admit that there are times when the ball bounces well, and Jinx flows like a really good game. Moving through a level, breaking tons of bricks, and getting to the exit, and then entering your desired level with no problems is nice, and dare I say fun. It's just that, well, this wasn't my experience probably 90% of the time that I played it. And I also tested things out, like getting through levels as quickly as I could, attempting to break every brick I could before exiting, and more just to see if I could get anything else to happen. But there's really nothing more to the game than what I've already said. Again, I was originally intrigued by Jinx because of the breakout-style gameplay, combined with adventure elements and level progression. But overall, well, it's just not really pulled off very well. And with that, I don't think there's a whole lot more to say about Jinx. So I think we can take it into the Atari Network pros and cons section and see if it can squeak out a recommendation. And we'll once again start with the positives. Jinx is a cool idea, combining paddle and ball gameplay with some exploration aspects, and occasionally it can play well. The music and voice during the opening screen is really done well, and the title screen looks great on the 2600 Plus. Honestly, the levels look pretty crisp on that console too. I also like the gravity obstacles in level 3, but that's, well, I guess that's all the pros I really have for Jinx, so it's already time to head into the negatives. And buckle up, we might be here for a while. First off, the ball can take some odd bounces, and it gets stuck in odd places sometimes. Also, the ball can bounce rapidly at times, causing the sound effect to play, well, in rapid succession, and it makes an already bad sound effect unbearable. The whole game just isn't fun to play, and I didn't really enjoy my time with it. More often than not, I was just frustrated trying to get the ball to go where I wanted it to. The levels are also pretty ugly, and there are some god-awful color choices. There's tons of pinks, oranges, and greens that can be especially harsh on the eyes when using original hardware. And even though there's 4 levels, well, there's just no sense of progression. I really wish there was more to Jinx other than getting a high score and replaying the same levels over and over again. And we'll just leave it there, I guess. So with all that said, I think it's fair to give Jinx on the Atari 7800 2 Pro-Line controllers out of 5. It's pretty bad, and I really can't recommend it to anybody who hasn't played it yet. If you do decide to give Jinx a go, be prepared to be underwhelmed by everything it has to offer. I think the idea is sound and one that could have been done very well, but the execution is poor, and the whole thing feels botched, which is a shame in my opinion. The 7800 desperately needed good games, especially when Jinx was released back in 1989. But now that I've said my piece, I want to hear what you think about the game. Do you agree with my score? Or do you know something I don't know that proves the game to be better than just a 2 out of 5? Have you played any other version of Jinx? If so, well, how do they compare to this one? I want to know about all this and more in the comments down below. And please, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. We put out 2 videos a week, so hit the bell icon to be notified whenever I upload. I'd also like to take this time to thank the following classy Atarians for supporting me on Patreon and YouTube memberships. You can too by hitting the join button below, or heading over to patreon.com/7800progamer. Either way, you get access to the same extra content, and you get a shout out at the end of every video. So thank you to HugeAss79, Jeremiah Thomas, Mr. Shua TV, Fence the Spook, Socrates63, Ball Gobbler, Jolt7800, OG Hugo, Head Trauma Bob, and my own Celestial. You guys rock. And please check out Manverse 7800 every other Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific. We try to conquer a different 7800 game during each live stream, and the next one will be on the date shown on the screen right now. Okay, with all that, it's time to wrap up yet another review for the channel. I'm the 7800 Pro Gamer, a triangle attempting to bounce a ball into a glowing circle in order to gain access to the Atari network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. And please remember to stay classy, Atarians.